Well, hello, you guys. As you heard, we have a couple of super smart, experienced men on the podcast today, and am excited to talk to Daniel and Nicholas because they've come and visited me here up at the Rainbow House. And prior to meeting them, I had no idea how much depth of understanding and clinical practice and science and philosophy these guys carry around. And I'm not an easy guy to impress, but they did impress me. And Daniel is one of our guests today, Daniel Vladeta. He's the creator of a device called the OOV, which is really quite a revolutionary piece of technology. I'm not some guy that's a gadget-oriented guy, but when they came up here and demonstrated it with me, I was super impressed. And I could see how it's a tool that can even do more than I was able to do on the Swiss ball, which is hard to convince me of, but they did. And I have a couple of them in my gym. Thank you to Nicholas. And we're also going to get to hang out and have dialogue with Nicholas Dawe. And Nicholas has been involved with the developmental education and working in the clinical environment and has a lot to do with the OOV, and also has a new book that recently came out that I wrote the foreword to, titled Biotra, which we may or may not have a lot of time to talk about today, but we do have an upcoming podcast where we will get deeper into that book because I think it's a fantastic, important book to explore. Now, Nicholas, before we get into the podcast in general, is the book out already?
Yeah, the book's out. It's on Amazon.
Okay, good. So if people want to check it out before we do our podcast on it, they can go to Amazon. It's Biotra, Biotra. It's a beautiful big book, loaded with great, really important information today. And as we alluded to earlier, I did write the foreword to it. And I thought it was important enough to devote some time to doing that. So that's my endorsement for the book. I think especially for those of you that are clinicians and people that are into outdoor exercise and functional exercise and want suggestions, ideas, philosophy, science to get you grounded back in a more natural way of living and moving your body. Both the OOV and the book Biotra are fantastic for that. So you guys, Daniel and Nick, great to have you here on the podcast. What I'd love to do before we begin is maybe each of you could share your developmental background, what led you to the things that you specialize in, and Nicholas, in your case, what led to the creation of the OOV. I love the name. I've always loved the name of it. I think it's fantastic. It's such a uniquely shaped device, too. It almost looks like a creature out of nature all by itself. So maybe you start with you, Nicholas, and then, Daniel, start with you on the OOV, then Nicholas, we can get into your background, your involvement and everything that we're going to talk about today. So Daniel, sorry, I think I get you guys mixed up sometimes. Not that you look alike, but just my brain crosswires the two of you.
He's the young, good-looking one.
Yeah, is he? Yeah, I'm the old fart.
Me too.
Yeah. So go ahead, Daniel, and share with us your developmental background and what led you to the OOV.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having us here today, Paul. Really appreciate you having us to be able to share our information here and all the work that you've done that really we're standing on a lot of the work that you did with the developmental reflexes, which we'll get into.
Yeah. Thank you.
So my journey is an interesting one. I have studies in osteopathy and neuroscience, and then ended up working clinically, of course, and then ended up in the medical device industry, where I then studied biomedical engineering. And so I've worked on both the clinical side, working with patients, and also the device side in surgery as well, and development of devices. And that was really the perfect nexus of what led me to developing the OOV. And actually, really, the reason why I went into the device industry was to understand how to develop the OOV, because I had this idea and I didn't have the tools and the skill set to be able to develop it. To bring this device that has information in it for practitioners to be able to use, but also for people to be able to use on their own. So my background is diverse. I've spent many years in clinic, and my neuroscience background and research was always driving me to actually communicate with the central nervous system first. Even though I've learned manual techniques to release joints and release tissue, for me that was always a big issue regarding, conceptually and philosophically, which I'm sure we'll get into, is that you're releasing tissue that the nervous system is actually tightening up. And so the idea was a device that had empowered the individual to check in with their own body every day. And that's led to a massive journey over the last 17 years since I launched the OOV. So the OOV's been in the market for 17 years. And obviously our use has evolved in that time. And Nick's been a very instrumental part in that with me as well. So a very interesting journey to get to this point. And Nick has been a very instrumental part in the last 10 years of collaborating with me on the education and the use of the OOV.
Fantastic. Once we all get a chance to hear from Nick about his background, I would like to loop back to you, Daniel, and find out what it was that actually inspired you to even want to create the OOV in the first place. I want to know what it was that you saw clinically, what your process was, and I'll lead the questions from there, but I'm very curious about that. And I didn't realize it's been around for 17 years. It amazes me because I would have thought somebody would have brought it to my attention while doing countless hundreds of lectures all through Australia and New Zealand over and over and over again. So it must have been hiding in a very small pocket of, osteopaths or something like that.
Clinical world, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll come back to that. Nicholas, love to hear about your background as well.
Thanks, Paul. Well, my background initially as a mover comes from the sporting world. And then later that interest took me down the path of also studying to be a manual therapist. I'm a registered chiropractor in Australia. And somewhere along the line in that journey, I started to, courtesy of my mother's influence, who's a very lateral thinker and a very bright woman, started to ask questions to the faculty that didn't invite satisfactory answers.
Sounds like every school.
It does. And so fortunately at that time, I was training in a really bespoke functional movement studio in Sydney, and the lady that I was training with said, look, you've really got to meet this guy, Daniel. And as the story goes, at least from her side, she was saying the same thing to Daniel. And we both resisted because neither of us has any interest in the other, basically at the beginning, and played phone tag for over a year. And then finally I went to meet Daniel begrudgingly, and our relationship started there, where he showed me the OOV, and I saw immediately that it had the innate capacity to answer some of the questions around why people's bodies do what they do, and why just having a manual therapy intervention often is misguided, and more often than that, again, is just transient. It only has a very small, short-lived benefit on the most instances before then returning back to that same strategy, and the person gets stuck on the hamster wheel dependent on the practitioner thereafter. Mm-hmm. So the OOV originally offered me a way of making sure that what we did manually in the clinic was able to be integrated and held for patients as they left my care. Mm-hmm. But then over the time became a very, very important diagnostic tool, and now has almost developed its own capacity to make really significant change in people's bodies that makes a lot of the grunt work that I was doing manually irrelevant anymore and reserves that for very particular instances where it needs to be deployed. And when under those circumstances it's deployed, the manual therapy is increased in its potency. So first and foremost, I'm a mover myself. I love to train. I'm still very active in the clinic. I'm client-facing all week. I'm seeing the monumental shift in the symptoms complexes that we're seeing and having to think really, really quickly on the ground in the trenches with the people to create new ideas and new strategies to help people, because what was working 10 years ago is now no longer working. What was working 20 years ago didn't work 10 years ago. And right now we're at the precipice of another incarnation of what we're seeing clinically. And we really need to come up with clever solutions, putting lots of people's heads together. And I'm just happy to be a part of that overall mesh network of people that are keen to give it a go. So I'm just here to back Daniel up with the OOV today and introduce any of the reflex topics if we get to them, and just very happy to be here. Thanks.
Daniel, I'm super interested in how it is that you talked about how you had this desire to create a device for a long time, and that put you on this journey, and you went into the developmental field of medical devices and things like that. What was it that you were seeing? It must have been your clinical practice, I would assume. And what was it that you were envisioning that led to the OOV? Because I think that's an interesting exploration right off the big bat here.
So the OOV, what led me to the OOV was really just driven by what I saw clinically, number one.
Which was what?
Well, number one, clinically, whatever I did on the table, I knew I had to integrate it neurally. I knew I had to get the nervous system to start to integrate those changes and take control of those changes. Otherwise, we get bounce back. We know that historically for forever and a day, if you release tissues, the tissues change back, go back to their previous position or tension.
We live in a world where stress is constant and distractions are endless. If you're like many of my clients juggling family, career, training, and spiritual practice, you've probably felt the toll it takes on your clarity and vitality. You may even be someone that can't get through the day without drinking coffee, even when it's not making you feel better anymore. That's why I'm excited to share something that's become part of my daily ritual, Nandaka by Peak. Nandaka means the sword of wisdom. It isn't your typical energy booster or coffee substitute. Nandaka is a sacred blend of organically grown adaptogenic and nootropic botanicals designed not to mask your fatigue, but to nourish your nervous system, feed your brain, and support deep, sustainable energy from the inside out. That's what true vitality is all about. Unlike most mushroom products that are stuffed with mycelium grown on grain, Nandaka is made from 100% fruiting bodies. That's where the medicine lives. You get the full spectrum of benefits of lion mane for mental clarity and nerve regeneration, reishi and chaga for modulating stress and inflammation, and ceremonial cacao rich in anandamide, the bliss molecule, to uplift your mood and calm your system. Even the cacao butter serves a higher purpose, acting as a delivery mechanism to carry these nutrients deep into your brain. When I take Nandaka before podcasting, teaching, writing, or conducting a therapy session, I notice something profound. The energy is steady, the focus is clean, and my creativity flows without resistance. It supports the body, the mind, and the soul all at once. And here's the truth. If your brain and nervous system are overstimulated and undernourished, you'll always be inviting burnout. That's why I don't treat the symptoms. I go to the source. And Nandaka aligns with that philosophy. I'm truly impressed with Nandaka, and that's why I'm excited to share this powerful, effective support and nourishment to help you stay vital throughout each day, to bring you many of the core nutrients most everybody's brain, nervous system, and body needs today. Currently, there are over 18,000 five-star reviews on Peak's amazing products, and Nandaka is trusted by some of the top minds in wellness for a reason, including me. These products actually work. Tune in, reconnect, nourish your core. Try Nandaka and feel the shift. Nandaka is a powerful ally, and right now you can get 20% off for life, plus a free starter kit with your first order and a rechargeable frother and helpful glass beaker for mixing your Nandaka exclusively at peaklife.com/Paul Chek. Once again, that's PIQUELIFE.com/PAULCHEK. peaklife.com/Paul Chek for 20% off for life plus a free starter kit with your first order. Have you ever heard of my parking lot test?
No.
Okay, I developed a test called the parking lot test for that very reason. Because I saw over and over again, working first for 2 years for a chiropractor, then 4 years in a physical therapy clinic, that a lot of what these people were doing, they had no method of integrating it. And you're making a change in the body, but the neural patterning of the body's not being changed. And many other factors I could get into, such as atlas subluxation, malocclusion of the jaw, inner ear problems, ocular problems, upper cervical problems, and a long list of things that led to the Chek totem pole. So I challenged the physical therapist that I worked with. I won't tell you the whole story because it's too long. But there was 20 of them that I worked with for 4 years, several of them with master's degrees in physical therapy. And I said to them, I'm willing to bet you that you cannot have your patient walk down. We had 2 flights of stairs or an elevator out to the parking lot from this very large clinic, the biggest clinic in San Diego for many, many years. We had a surgical center there, 13 neuro and orthopedic surgeons. So it was a pretty big, complex place. And so some of them were too chicken to do it, but several of them tried it. So they would do things like realign the pelvis or try to get a scapula repositioned or, any number of things, right? A knee to be more stable, to get patella tracking better. None of them could pass the parking lot test. As soon as person with a pelvic torsion would walk down, touch their car and walk back, all the changes were gone. And so I told them that's because you're not doing integration work and you're not resetting the system. And at that time was before I went to advanced training in the Czech Republic with Vladimir Yonda and Carol Levitt, where I studied Vojta's method of infant development, which triggered off many years study of infant development. But what you're bringing up is a very important point, and that is that chiropractors, osteopaths, therapists of all types don't actually go through an integration process. So the fact that you saw that, to me, tells me already you're a lot smarter than most people out there, no matter how many friggin' degrees they have. So Thank you. Is it from that process, how did you shape this concept that you needed this thing? And what was it going to be?
It was interesting because initially I started with chi balls or Pilates balls under the pelvis with rolled towels, and then into foam rollers and half foam rollers and all the way into having curved shapes shaped from polystyrene foam that we would then hand shape for their actual individual patient to make it fit them. So, this idea of, first of all, for me, that I can't believe no one ever thought of having 3 curves of a device to match the 3 curves of the spine. For me, it's not rocket science. It's so obvious.
Most people don't even know what normal curvatures are. You realize that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm talking the most elite rehab people.
I know. So this idea of 3 curves to match the 3 curves of the spine. And even when I went through all of that process, and customizing a polystyrene shape to that individual patient using foam to build areas up or reduce it down. And when they lay on it, and in this beautiful axially elongated state, I was still disappointed. I was still underwhelmed because they weren't having to work to control that position. They weren't needing to work there. So it was all static. It was all something that actually didn't trigger the nervous system to have to adapt, to change, to control this position.
It does. I would interject that it does, but it takes a long time.
I don't have that amount of time, so I'm very impatient, Paul. So
you need to be in today's market. But for example, when people have increased kyphosis and forward head posture, they have adaptive shortening of the anterior longitudinal ligament, which, having done 5 cadaver dissections myself, I can tell you that's a very strong, thick ligament. And I think fascia has a tensile loading force of 2,000 pounds per square inch. So, for example, I would have people lay on a hard floor for 15 to 20 minutes a couple of times a day to use gravity to progressively stretch the anterior longitudinal ligament out. And as long as that was coupled with corrective exercises, they could integrate the changes. But if you don't have that postural awareness and exercises to help take advantage of the new length in the ligament, they just, within seconds, the parking lot testing, and they're right back where they started. And so there's a real issue of, like you say, passive versus active integration, and also the adaptation of the ligamentous and muscular system to these faulty postures, or adaptive postures, if you would be more accurate. And so if we don't have a complete system that's looking at the adaptive changes in fascia, joint capsules, ligaments, and length tension relationships, then what you're getting is just palliative care all the time.
And one of the things that I found with doing something static is it's not integrating multi-systems into that position at the same time. So one of the issues is that we're not integrating those systems at the same time. So even though we're working on musculoskeletal and joint spacing and biomechanics, etc., that we're not integrating the cerebellum, the brainstem, the deep control of postural control. We're not integrating the limbic system into and the emotional system into task-based learning and that then upregulates into the prefrontal and motor cortex that hardwires these learning experiences in there, creating neural pathways. So part of the idea of creating something was that it integrated not just an instability, not just a position, but then also created this environment where the body had to reorganize itself. It's innately intelligent. It wants to find organization. It's built into us to find organization. Our nervous system wants to do that. It just needs to be given the opportunity to. And the idea of the OOV was about that. But the journey to develop it was an interesting one, because for me, I went down the road of, I was really inspired by nature. I really saw the shape and the geometry of the OOV in rainforest near where I live now, which is outside of Byron Bay. And I went into this amazing rainforest underneath these cliffs with waterfalls, etc., and found and saw a geometry that, as I started to delve and research, that geometry exists in all of nature. And humanity has used those geometries, those sacred geometries, historically for architecture, for many, many different things. Da Vinci explored it in Vitruvian Man. Corbusier explored it in modular. So I went on a journey to start to understand that if we're going to intrinsically develop, if I'm going to develop a device with some intelligence in it, doesn't it make sense that I bring the intelligence of nature and how all form evolves from, which is sacred geometry and Fibonacci, into this device? And hence why it has such an unusual shape. And you did mention that it's almost biological, because it was inspired by nature. And we are nature itself. We are part of nature. So I believe that we need to create solutions that have this intelligence in it, and our body then will adapt and resonate towards that.
Yeah, what I was thinking about how I would describe it from looking at it, from the first time I used it, it struck me. But what came up to me is it's like a cross between a short eel and a baby stingray.
Yes.
It's like it's got the length, it's longer. The stingray has bigger wings and a shorter neck and head, but it's got enough length to have sort of the eel type energy, but the body of it is more like I would say a developing stingray. I mean, those are the only things I could think up. I don't know if you guys have thought of anything else that would give the listener more of a mental image of it, but when you're on it, it's certainly a very amazingly dynamic piece of equipment that has effects that I had not experienced in anything else prior to it. So I think, great spirit, nature, your souls, all of them combined led you to creating something that I have a feeling must have some connection to something in us that's primal, and I'm not talking reflexes, I'm talking something environmental, because it is external to us when we're using it. So it's part of the environment. So I haven't had a chance to really meditate on that. I don't know if either of you guys have, but there's something definitely going on there. You got something to say, Nick?
Yeah, I think that that layer within us is this primordial, embryologically derived contractile field anatomy that Philip Beach articulates, and it's predominantly made up. Yeah, predominantly is made up of this kind of liquid crystal fascial unfolding, and the ways that people are instructed to lay on the oove and engage with the oove restores or re-engenders the ability to connect into that deep embryological capacity within us, which is naturally very instructive to some of the more outward-facing aspects of how we function, like the brainstem and the reflexes that you mentioned. So I think when someone lays on that, particularly in the side-lying positions, it's very amphibian in that nature. It starts to invite in that lateral sort of movement, like what we would see in creatures in the ocean, in that the primordial waters, and starts to tap back into things that were developed reflexively even in utero, where we were moving through this liquid medium and starting to learn and inhibit different sort of maturation processes in our nervous system before we became terrestrial. So I think you're spot on with your and one of the things I was really impressed with when I met you at your house was that you took one look at it and you really understood the range of function that it can bestow upon someone, whereas the majority of people have to go on quite an extensive experiential journey, then quite an extensive academic journey to get even just a top level understanding of how it works. But you took one look at it and just goes, oh, it's the material plus the shape plus how you engage with it that delivers the medicine. And I wholeheartedly agree.
Hi, everybody. My family and I love Organifi's green juices. You can get your green juice in 2 excellent flavors, crisp apple and original mint. Not only are these products made with certified organic ingredients to support your family's nutritional needs, they each have some unique benefits. Your green juice crisp apple eases stress with an effective dose of 600 milligrams of ashwagandha per serving. Helps reduce cortisol spikes that increase snacking urges and aids keeping your blood sugar balanced. Why snack on inferior foods that lack nutrition and often lead to blood sugar spikes followed by blood sugar crashes when Organifi's green juices are super healthy, taste great, and are as quick to make as opening the package and adding water. Your green juice crisp apple is made from fresh apples picked right off the branch and are packed with micronutrients to support your body's needs. Green juice original mint contains ashwagandha, chlorella, and spirulina. Reset your body every morning with 11 detoxifying superfoods. You'll love the delicious taste and your body will feel strong and stable with all the micronutrients in each serving. Green juice original mint promotes balanced cortisol and stress levels, perfect for weight management, and helps rid the body of harmful toxins. Personally, I'm super grateful that Organifi makes such excellent, easy-to-use drinks and foods that keep us energized, healthy, and clean inside while decreasing the urge to crave on inferior snack foods. My kids love both flavors, and I love knowing that we can all be healthy together with Organifi's excellent crisp apple and original mint green juices. These products are excellent for work, on the road, sharing with friends, and anytime you need a nutritious boost that tastes good. To get your crisp apple and original mint green juices, go to organifi.com/check20. That's organifi.com/check20. Save 20% on your purchase using the code check20, all caps, on checkout. Don't worry if you forget your Living 4D discount code, because you'll see it right there on the landing page. Enjoy Organifi's excellent green juices. Yeah, you triggered a thought in me. Have either of you ever read the book titled The Aquatic Ape? I don't remember the author's name. I think both of you would find that a fascinating read. If you remind me, I'll dig it up out of my library. It's called The Aquatic Ape. I think there's only one book titled that, but it's by I believe it's an anthropologist who did extensive research and found and shows amazing pictures of what I believe it's a woman, felt that we actually evolved out of the ocean, and shows the transition from creatures like seals and sea lions and how they actually develop bone structures just like our hands, and gives evidence for the fact that we came on shore in more of an amphibious role and progressively became upright. And it's when you read the book, it's a pretty solid theory that I think, probably for reasons of academia not wanting their dogma to be changed, has been, like many others, stuffed under the carpet. But I think the two of you would get a lot out of that book. It's quite fascinating.
There's another book which is called The Ocean Within, where they look at the extracellular fluid and have matched that to the ocean, and it's pretty much exactly the same constitution, yes, etc. So basically, that would make sense that we've evolved from an like aquatic environment into land, but still retain that the composition of the ocean within us.
And you can see that we still do. we yes. come out of an ocean in our mother's womb.
Yeah, it might be that it's still within us and that it's not separate to us and that we've evolved from it, but that it's a capacity that's lodged within the deep totality of who and what we are. And there's probably some great value into reestablishing a connection with it, and it may well be one of the missing pieces that's contributing to a lot of suffering right now, both in the 3D and beyond realms of our experience.
Yes, and when you consider the fact that by molecular count we're 99.9 to about the sixth or higher decimal point water, so we really are, and it's, a lot of it's got a pH. Our blood is the same pH as the ocean if the ocean's healthy. So, there's so many rabbit holes a person could dive down looking at these things. That I think all these things need to be considered. I don't know. Did you guys ever read the article Matthew Walden and I wrote called "The Ghost in the Machine: Is Musculoskeletal Medicine Lacking Soul"?
Yeah, Matt shared that with me. Thanks.
Okay. That's now the fourth most read article ever published by Elsevier Publications, which is pretty wild when you consider that's thousands and thousands of articles. But the reason I bring that up is because we were trying to say, look, you're treating the body like a machine. It's not. There's a soul in there. There's consciousness in there. There's a living person in there. And as long as you keep addressing people with all these sort of stick figure biomechanical concepts, you're always going to be treating a machine and not what's in it, living in it. So I just wanted to just throw that on the table for general mention. And for those of you are in professional rehab, you might want to read the book. The Ghost in the Machine: Is Musculoskeletal Medicine Lacking Soul? And it's by Matthew Walden and Paul Chek, and it's in Bodywork and Movement Therapy is the journal. And Nick, Daniel, I wanted to come back to you. You mentioned pretty much every part of the brain earlier in your description. as you were talking about your concepts of developing the OOF, but you left out one, the cerebral cortex, which I think is very, very important, because in my years of rehab, as you know, is over 40 now, 41 years, one of the things that I found early, which led me to the development of the importance of my 1, 2, 3, 4 system. One is you have to identify a dream bigger than their challenge that they're willing to buy into. Because I found if they don't have a dream bigger than themselves or bigger than their challenge, the inertia of their habits, the inertia of their relationships, and the inertia of the average person in society pulls people down. And so the reason I bring up the cerebral cortex is because I found no matter how great your rehab does, if you don't help a person seek something worth living for, I often quote psychologist Jerry Wesh, who says, if you have a big enough dream, you don't need a crisis. And I found that to be very true. So I found even with the most skilled rehab I could do, for example, you have, I don't know if you guys have the term in Australia, but here there's a term called illness syndrome, which is a dependency, and there's tests you can do for it and things like that. But ultimately, the way I would describe it is people that have chronic low back pain end up having a bunch of friends with chronic low back pain. People that have brain injuries end up hanging out with a bunch of brain injury people. And so what I found is if I didn't work with them to find something that they really want to heal for, grow for, and step into, whether it be a woman who's elderly and wants to play with her grandkids, or a hockey player wanting to get back into, the game and make money, support his family, that I could not get people to get out of the psychophysical reality that led them into the problems that they were facing. Point being is I had to work not only at the lower level in rehab, but I had to engage the cerebral cortex, prefrontal cortex, and the limbic structure in a dream goal or objective that they could use as motive and inspiration, so that I could actually help them begin to see their life in a more empowering way and see that the pain that they were experiencing was actually a doorway to possibility. And that's where I created the name The Pain Teacher, to say, the pain teacher comes to draw your attention to where you need to pay attention, or you're going to keep repeating the same mistakes and the pain teacher just gets louder and louder until you're dead. Have you got, either of you, thoughts on that aspect of it?
Can I start quickly and then I'll go to Nick? One of the first questions I always historically asked in the clinic is not where your pain is, what's going on. It's like, what's going on that's stopping you do what you want to do?
Right.
And then straight away, I find I already have an insight in what their goals are or what their dream is to be able to do. And if I can start my first session to show them tools that gets them closer to that dream, I don't have to motivate people to do their own exercises. Then we've already got buy-in. Number one, Nick, do you want to add to that?
Well, just on a philosophical level, the cortex is 3D printed from the earlier impressions from the sensory arrival coming back up to the brain. So it's all well and good on the assumption that someone had a normal or healthy developmental journey in their lives, but we're seeing increasingly that is being challenged in utero and intergenerationally. So sometimes their cortex has already been mapped out by the impoverishment of information that their nervous system has received. So it's really handy to have a diagnostic tool to ascertain who is in which camp and to know where to start to travel what ultimately has to be a complete sphere in that person's journey to find and remember rather their full capacity.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember the brain's highly plastic. I mean, not only is there a mountain of research on that, but we can see it clinically working with people and watch their bodies change, their behaviors change. And that's what the myriad of systems out there from what is it, neurolinguistic programming that Tony Robbins is into, and there's many of these out there now. There's the emotion code. There's so many of these codes popping up everywhere now. But I know from working with people and working on myself that we can adapt and change, but we need a skilled guide to help us overcome what you just referred to, Nicholas, which is a lot of the developmental influences that tend to shape our brain and shape our health and our choices and our personality. So I think those are key concepts. There was another thought that slipped out of my mind, but I think I would just go back to you, Nick, and say the one thing that I found related to your comment about asking people and finding that they have goals is that often people state what they think the therapist wants to hear, or they give goals that sound logical. But when I do deeper work to qualify that, to see if their heart's into it, for example, I can tell you I've had many people like UPS drivers that got injured. And I would say to them, what is your dream or goal for this therapy? And I just want to get back to making a living. But when I looked further, I found out that they hated their job and they really didn't want to do it. And oftentimes that's why they took so long to rehab, because they were making money by not having to work. So I often found what the real issue was is that they wanted a career change, but were too afraid to do it, didn't know how to do it, didn't know how they would be able to financially survive. So I ended up having to do a lot of deeper work. And over the years, that led me to having to do an extensive study of psychology, depth psychology, the different psychological systems, shamanism, and all the different ways to interact with a person at a psychic level to get them up and out of that deeper issue. So I'm only sharing this just for the completeness and the fact that I think that sometimes we have to be careful, because what people state their goals are doesn't turn out to be an authentic goal that their heart's involved in. And it takes a little bit more exploration to get people. But we always know that. I mean, guys like you, Nicholas, and Daniel, and myself, and Chek professionals all over the world know, because when somebody states a goal, but they don't complete it, then we know there's something wrong, and we start looking deeper.
Steiner talks about a lot the illness you have to have. He wrote an essay on it,
Mm-hmm.
and the innate intelligence of the body to actually, and when there's a disconnect between your soul and your body, then that's what ends up possibly taking the body to create this illness or disease or this pain that brings you, it makes you go back to pay attention back to your body. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the stories I always, stories I talk to about patients when they're in that is that, this is not a dictatorship. This is not a dictatorship. You're not here to dictate to your body what to do. It's an interdependent relationship with your body, and you can learn a lot from your body if you stop top down and start to listen to it. It starts to teach you many, many things. So this idea of, when you have an illness or when you have pain, that gives you the opportunity, or gives you that time to able to start to listen and change your relationship with your body.
If you have listened to even one episode of Paul's podcast before, then you will know that he is passionate, and some would say even fanatical, about the quality of the food he eats and where it is sourced from. That is why the Chek household only eats pasture-raised meat, wild-caught fish, and organic produce. And that is why we subscribe to Wild Pastures meat delivery service. Each month, Wild Pastures delivers a box of meat that has been raised by family farmers in the USA using regenerative farming practices. 100% grass-fed and finished beef, pasture-raised chicken, and pasture-raised pork, as well as wild-caught seafood. You can customize the selection in your box, add on extra when you know you will be feeding more people, or change your options each and every month. You might be thinking that this will be too expensive for you, but Wild Pasture's mission is to offer the highest quality meat at the lowest prices because they want to transform the meat industry. And that means that more people need to be able to choose meat that is raised right. Their pasture-raised animals are part of a natural ecosystem. Their farmers use rotational grazing, practices that mimic nature, and so do not need to use synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, hormones, or antibiotics. This beautiful process doesn't require the external resources, such as massive amounts of GMO grain, required with environmentally depleting conventional methods. And best of all, the meat and fish taste amazing. And for Paul's listeners, Wild Pastures are offering you 20% off your subscription for life, $15 off your first order, and free shipping. Seriously, you can't find a better deal for top quality pasture-raised meat. Go to wildpastures.com/Paul Chek. You don't need a promo code. Just visit wildpastures.com/Paul Chek and start choosing the goodies you will have delivered to you in your first box.
Well, one of the ways I demonstrate that to people all the time, I would imagine both of you by now have probably figured this one out, but the number of people that are afraid to or won't get into a cold plunge because they keep convincing themselves that they can't handle it or that it's going to be painful or whatever the story that runs on is. And I'm talking about even seasoned elite level athletes and, big tough guys that are martial artists and things like that. But what I say to them is, look, it's just water. Your body has all the reflexes and intelligence to know exactly what to do. Instead of listening to your head, do me a favor, get in the water and just listen to your body. And let your body tell you if it likes it, but don't listen to your head. You have to bring your head down into your body and pay attention. And every single person that I've ever been able to get to make that transition gets out and said, oh my God, my body really loved this. I don't know why my mind was so against it. Have you come across that?
Of course. And I think, once again, it's an interesting philosophical point to start to gently and tenderly break down the notion that there could be a separation between the mind and the body, that there could be two separate entities existing within the whole. And so I loop back to the notion that understanding the person that's in front of you at a very deep level and approaching their journey from that standpoint bestows the practitioner with more leverage to allow that person to undergo their transformation back to that unified state where their body and their mind are, as it must be, one singular organism operating within this wider mesh network of the whole.
Yeah. Daniel, I want to come back to you about something, well, to both of you, but Daniel, you triggered me to write a note about it. And sorry, Nick, I'm speaking to Nick. I keep crossing you too, but Daniel, you were talking about something just a minute ago, and you've mentioned Steiner. In Steiner's writings, he said something quite profound. He said, whenever you're working with a patient that has chronic pain, you have to find their secret story. And I think that's a very essential part of a Chek professional's training. That work doesn't come till the fifth year, Integrated Movement Science 5, which used to be Chek Practitioner Level 4, which is a 2-week training devoted to the psyche, analysis of the psyche. And I take them through a deep analysis myself and show them how to do the steps. I have them create their own personal myth. I analyze that with them. I have them paint their myth in a mandala so that they can encapsulate it. But I think that, this really gets to the deeper issue, is that a lot of people, and this goes back to Nicholas's comments about the developmental influences, a lot of people have what Ken Wilber calls a story gap. And that is what you're saying to people on the outside and what you're presenting to the world on the outside is not what you're saying to yourself on the inside, nor how you value yourself, how you judge yourself, or how you relate to yourself. And so there's this conflict between the external persona and the internal reality, which generates a story gap, which is where Steiner's secret story, which is why I'll never be successful, why I'll never be happy, why I will never get to marry the person that'll love me, and on it goes. And of course, all those things manifest in the body, because as far as the cells of the body are concerned, the mind of the body is God talking. And we can see that easily. You don't see depressed people walking around smiling with upright posture because their mind takes over their body and the body believes it. It's also why we have now got many books showing miraculous healings of even stage 4 cancer, where a person reached a point where they decided that they wanted to live and had a dream bigger than themselves. And sometimes within as little as a couple of days, tumors the size of oranges disappear. And I've got many books documenting that. So I'm just pointing back to Steiner's concept of the secret story. And I think it takes as much clinical experience and skill of analysis to get to the secret story and help people resolve as it does to be a master practitioner in what we would call rehabilitative or musculoskeletal arts. The problem is there's very little integration of training on the psyche and training on the physiology and the structure and the mechanics of the body.
You can also go the other way as well, in the sense of someone's story can keep perpetuating their pain.
That's my point. It's a bilateral, it's a two-way street.
Exactly. So part of what we try to do is change their story very, very quickly. By showing them that they can change their story, empowering them to change their story.
Yeah. Were you going to say something, Nick?
Yeah, I love the notion of the story gap and how that relates to the concept that we talk about impoverishment within these established loops, within these established and predictive pathways in someone's entire demeanor. And so the technology that we have nowadays to go back and start to supply the richness of information at all holographic levels of someone's nervous system and other anatomical related structures really allows the fertile ground for planting other notions and other belief systems into the person about their full capacity for goodness, which is deeply inbuilt into everyone.
I think, too, as it relates to kind of our general conversation today, Ervin Laszlo, you guys are familiar with Ervin Laszlo? You know, he's a systems theorist and, multiple time Nobel Prize laureate, genius of a man. He says the best time to change a system is when it's in chaos because it's unstable. You know the old saying, if it works, don't fix it, because it's stable. If your tire rolls and the pressure's right, you don't need to stop at the gas station every 10 minutes to see if the thing's rolling and the pressure's right. You'll notice it in the handling of the car if there's something. But when you put somebody on the OOV, for example, or you use any of the number of different therapies we could talk about that move in this direction, now you're making the body aware that there's a change process beginning and that it can embrace the change process. And this is why I think the psychophysical reality has to be worked with together, because if you're aware of how the body is going through changes in a healing process and a growth process, and you can use that opening or that window to access the psyche of the individual, I actually think it's easier for people to change at the psychological level when their body is going through a change and they're embracing, even if they're only embracing one end of the equation. In other words, consciously they're focusing on just their body, but the coach or the therapist is working with them and giving them cues and helping them see their life from a different perspective without it being the primary intention. Or if someone's primary intention is, working with how to change a person's secret story or to close the story gap or to reevaluate their myth, if they're in a process of using exercise or rehabilitative approaches scientifically, I think the two really facilitate each other. Do you guys have any thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, I think you open a really important doorway there and you should remember when I'm with what I'm about to say that I have nothing to do with OOV as a product and never have. And so when I say this, it has quite a lot of integrity in that the OOV allows people to get really, really close to that chaotic point while still retaining deep brainstem safety assurances that are absolutely essential if we're going to ask huge amounts of neural infrastructure to undergo its own subconscious review process. If we put someone in an environment where they don't feel safe or comfortable, their brainstem will shut off and we become purely cerebral practitioners again, going back around the wheel that maybe worked once. It does not work anymore. It maybe once worked to tell someone what to do with their body and hope that they had the kinesthetic awareness to translate that language into a felt sensation in their body and execute that movement in a way that was the way it was ideally meant to be done, which is in parentheses because that's an erroneous notion in itself, and B, sustainable as soon as they took their mind off the ball, so to speak, and hope that that persisted in their natural day-to-day environment. It's just not what happens anymore. So we need to find newer technologies. We can use the old information. The old information is gold. What we're standing on here is gold, but the technology needs to iterate now to take into account the unprecedented amount of brainstem lack of safety that's showing up on the clinical doorstep.
If you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you've probably heard Paul raving about one of his absolute go-to supplements, P3OM from Bioptimizers. Well, they've given it a new name, Probiotic Breakthrough. It's the same amazing formulation, just with a new name. Here's a chat that Paul and Wayne had about Probiotic Breakthrough before it changed its name.
You know, Bioptimizers makes an amazing product called P3OM, which is a prebiotic product. And it's amazing for not only helping repopulate the gut with friendly bacteria, but as Wade will tell you, it's really, really an amazing product in case you ever feel like you're getting any kind of food poisoning or illness coming on. And Wade's right here with me, and he's the co-founder of Bioptimizers, and he knows more about P3OM than anybody. But I can tell you this, I've had nothing but excellent results and nothing but positive feedback from all my clients and friends that I've turned on to P3OM. So Wade, tell us a little bit about P3OM and why it works so well.
Well, P3M is, we call it the Navy SEAL of probiotics.
Amen.
Basically, its job is to kick out the bad guys in your body. Food poisoning is one of those things from bad bacteria. What we've done is we've taken an aggressive strain of L. plantarum. We put it into toxic soup, ran a sine wave to keep a few of them alive. And the few survivors we grow in very specialized medium to make a cultured, patented enzyme that has extraordinary powers. Number one, it survives the intestinal tract.
Yes.
And number two, it absolutely hunts down pathogens in the body, bacteria, viruses, these type of things. And this is really where the future of probiotics is. It is about developing and culturing and creating super strains of probiotic, very much like the Navy SEALs goes through a training, and these individuals have extraordinary powers to deal with chaos. And in today's world where we want to improve our immunity and our function and our gut health, P3OM is head and shoulders above any probiotic out there.
So my understanding is it can be used daily as a supplement, but it can also be used in larger quantities as a defense measure.
We've tested this literally with over 100 of our friends who have been suffering from various times of food poisoning. And a handful of those guys, when you're in food poisoning, and within 20 to 30 minutes, you complete recovery.
That's awesome. And I've seen it happen myself. Angie has felt bad a number of times, and several of people in the house or family have. And I say, take 10. If that doesn't feel good in an hour, take 20. And you've told me you can't overdose on them, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's the beauty of P3OM. You can't take too much. They'll fight off the bad guys, and they'll get your digestion rocking and rolling the way it should.
So if you want to have a healthy gut and you want some defense, carry P3OM with you wherever you go, airplanes, cars, business meetings, hotels, conferences, and you've got your Navy SEALs in the bottle. and they're ready for you anytime.
Spirit Gym with Paul Chek listeners now get 15% off their purchase of Probiotic Breakthrough by going to bioptimizers.com/Spirit Gym and use the code PAUL15 at checkout. You can choose from 3 different sizes, and in addition, Bioptimizers always have special bonus gifts and additional savings when you get multiple bottles. So head to bioptimizers.com/Spirit Gym and check out Probiotic Breakthrough with the code PAUL15 for 15% off.
That kind of leads to a question I wanted to ask you. I wrote it down. If you guys see me looking down, it's not that I'm ignoring you. I'm writing notes so I don't have to interrupt you. I get so much stuff coming into me while I'm listening to intelligent people like you or guests on the show that I write things down that I think are important to talk about. And this one comes from earlier in our conversation. You were talking about the different environments, Nicholas, that people are coming in and how things that were working aren't working. And one of the things that's going on that I would be curious to hear both of your thoughts on is that if you read the book, The Body Electric by Robert O. Becker, I believe that book was written about 1998. He says in that book, based on his research, that in 1998, the average person was experiencing more information through their nervous system in 24 hours than a person in the year 1900 did in their entire lifetime. Okay, so when you look at what's happened since 1998 and the absolutely massive traffic of information hitting people, not only at the conscious, but the subconscious and unconscious levels, and the fact that so much more of the information now is fear-based. It's, think of what COVID did to people. My observations are that has basically, it triggers a fight, flight, freeze reaction in a lot of people, whichever their personality is. You got your type A types that can be more flight based. You got your type B types that can be more freeze based. You've got some that will go into shallow breathing and have periods without breathing, and they'll lock their abdominal wall up. Their peristalsis will slow down to almost nothing. They'll have a lot of problems with constipation. You got others that will go more towards irritable bowel syndrome and be pooping all the time and peeing all the time, and sort of when I used to race motocross and stock cars, we all were used to the fact that just before you were going to start the race, you had to run to the toilet, because you're jacked up. And so what are your thoughts on how that's affecting everybody? Because I think that's a major player that people aren't really looking at in rehab. I think, there's people like Jordan Peterson and other looking at it and in psychology. And then there's Daniel, what's his name? The Huberman, famous guy that has a big podcast. But these are real issues. And I don't think our bodies are really designed to handle the downpour of information from the cerebral cortex into the lower centers of the brain. And I'll just say one more thing. Did either of you ever read Paul MacLean's work, The Triune Mind? You guys, especially Nicholas, what you're into, you'd find that phenomenal. Paul MacLean was the neuroscientist, brain researcher that first identified that there was the 3 functions of the 3 sections of the brain that work together: the brainstem, the limbic system, and the higher brain centers. And he called that the triune mind. And then later experts said there's now 4 minds because they include the prefrontal cortex and cerebral. Well, the cerebral was in Paul MacLean's. But what he shows is at the reptilian level, there's 3 key issues that are being monitored at the reptilian or brainstem level. And that is, first and foremost, am I safe? He describes how the first thing a reptile will do is check its hunting territory to make sure there's no competition or predators that can stop it or threaten its own survival, then it goes hunting to feed itself. So first is, am I safe? Second is, can I satiate myself? And third is the procreative reflex to perpetuate. And he says anything that stopped us from feeling safe, feeding ourselves, and procreating triggers off very, very deep reactions and reflex and survival drives that have consequences, as you would know. So I think these are important things to look at. But when we're getting all this information overload and you look at what's been going on in the world, in the last 20 years, but particularly since COVID, the question, am I safe? The answer is going to be perceived by most people no. I mean, look at what happened in your country and Canada and even United States and many countries around the world. Nobody felt safe. Then can I feed myself? Well, what if you're feeding yourself junk all the time like most people are and your body's starving all the time no matter how much you eat? So you can't shut that reflex off. And one of the problems is when you start procreating in an environment where you're not safe and you're not ever able to satiate yourself and give your body the nutrition it needs, that's got to trigger off another deep fear. And look at all the problems we have with infertility today and all the children being born with all sorts of serious health problems, chronic health diseases, heart conditions, diabetes. I mean, it's obvious that the human race is imploding into itself. So I just wanted to share some of these concepts, but the real key question, Nicholas, you triggered with, because we didn't really touch on the issue of information overload. What are you guys seeing in that regard?
Paul, my shorthand is basically 6 to 1, half dozen to another. I think that these influences are having an effect on the cortical electromagnetic integrity, so that actually what we're seeing clinically is not so much an overload of that system, but that system's inability to any longer compensate and show up functionally in a world, lowering its capacity to do so for many reasons, which probably would blow out this podcast if we went down them, leaving what's under the hood on display. So leaving what is in those lower echelons of neural defensive strategies in the mammalian brain and the reptilian brain, if we follow the triune model. And what we're seeing now clinically is the outward-facing effect of people's loss of ability to, at great metabolic cost, which feeds into your nutritional notion that you shared, loss of ability to override and compensate and hold together in the cortex what is underneath the hood. And I think we're seeing just the crest of the wave. It started to move, as you say, after Obeka's work in 2000 and really escalated in 2018 prior to COVID. I saw a really astronomical shift in the clinic. And this year, at the start of this year, we're seeing an unprecedented turn up in particular types of neurological presentations in otherwise innocuous people, in otherwise healthy young specimens, extraordinarily significant neurological impairment.
And what would be some examples of that? Because I'm curious to see how the cascade coming from the top down is showing up as you see it. What I would say in my observation and in Chek professionals' observation, because I talk to a lot of them and the instructors, is that more and more people are showing blockages that would be attributed to infant development disorders. But I think that they may be exactly what you're talking about. I think that there's a level of shock that's going all the way through the system and manifesting in a disintegration of the body systems, to put it simply. Daniel, now that you've heard my concerns about information overload and all the fear mongering, how have you seen that play out with how it's affecting the lower brain centers, the body, and what are you seeing clinically?
Well, I think this is more than just information overload, that as you've alluded to, but we're also getting a lot of ambient stimulation from
5G.
EMFs, environmental, the amount of sound, like I'm currently in Los Angeles, the amount of sound that I'm getting compared to being in a rural environment in Australia is extremely high, and my nervous system is adapting as a result of that. But then let's even go to the other level where we are training people and working with the nervous system from a top-down approach. Even in rehabilitation, everything is top-down, that you have to learn to control your body. You have to learn to activate these muscles. It's all a top-down. So then people are walking around with this overstimulation, thinking that they have to consciously control all of these different things in their body, or consciously think these things through, which are actually subconscious functions as well. So I think that it's not just, yes, we're being bombarded with information, but also the way we're teaching people, the way that we're training people to work their body. It's all a very top-down approach, which in the end, as you talked about in fight or flight responses, that if someone goes into a freeze mode, that they cannot function from a cortical level. If someone's in a fight or flight response, the nervous system does not listen to the cortical level. It's brainstem, cerebellum, midbrain. Mm-hmm. So this approach of top down is not working, and it's systemic throughout all of society, from our education, from our rehabilitation, from everything that we're doing. Mm-hmm. So I totally agree with you. And I think it's partially environmental, but I think it's also adaptive of how we're actually working with people's bodies and teaching people to work within their own bodies as well. I think Nick's got a more neurological explanation to this as well.
Yeah, Nick, have you got some thoughts you want to share?
I liked that answer. We were talking a little bit before about the underlying nature of why these things are presenting, and you asked me what I was seeing in the clinic. So I might start there, and then that might offer another sort of doorway into further explanation. Is we're starting to see, as I mentioned before, these really significant and very quirky neurological presentations emerge in otherwise healthy and young populations without the traditional instigating means for such presentations. Things like enormous spatiotemporal disintegration, random eye movements relating to random functionality in the body, different trigeminal nerve feedback loops coming from positions in the mouth and the jaw that had no dental history or an otherwise solid foundation that we would have seen between 10 and 5 years ago. We're now starting to see this en masse dysregulation start to take place and impacting people's livelihoods and way of being, to the extent that just this week alone, clinically, I have 3 separate instances between 18 to 25-year-olds that are completely resorted to bed, unable to speak, unable to move, without any sort of seemingly tangible reason as to why. So to feed that back in, I think that they were probably propping themselves up from a cortical strategy, a learned response, something like mirror neurons from their parents or motor equivalents in terms of developmental movement strategies, and all of a sudden something really significant, either environmentally or internally or cosmically as a species, has rendered them unable to maintain the facade of functionality, and now we're seeing what is underneath that in the lower levels of the brain, in the brainstem particularly, and these things could be in uterine developmental strategies, a lack of inhibition of certain reflexes, and any other insult that may have transpired very early on in their life, hence the need for really tangible, accessible, and safe strategies to go back and re-engender the richness in the strategies at that level of development in adult populations.
Hi everyone, this is Penny, interrupting Paul's podcast with an important announcement. If you've been listening to Paul's podcast regularly, you'll already know how much your gut affects everything, from your mood to your energy to your overall vitality. So here's something I'm genuinely excited to share. The Chek Institute is offering the Gut Health Reset, a free online mini course designed to help you finally get your digestion and your life back on track. Yep, it's completely free and there's no catch. This course gives you the tools to understand what your gut's been trying to tell you. You'll learn how to identify the root causes of bloating, fatigue, and brain fog, and how to start supporting your microbiome naturally. It's packed with Paul's tried and true wisdom and the Chek Institute's holistic approach, the same philosophy that's transformed thousands of lives. Think of it as a short, powerful reset to reconnect you with your body before the new year hits. So if you're ready to finish this year strong and start 2026 feeling clear, energized, and balanced, grab your free access now. Just head to paul.chekinstitute.com/spiritgym. Again, that's paul.chekinstitute.com/spiritgym and start your gut health reset today. Your gut, and honestly, your whole body, will thank you.
Yeah, there's a few thoughts that came to me that I think are relevant here. I've seen a lot of strange things. Now, I don't see so many people hands-on in the clinic. I work with large groups of people, but I'm very capable of reading bodies and I'm also interacting with a lot of Chek professionals all over the world, answering questions about what they're coming across. But for example, I've had more cases of Tourette syndrome show up asking me for help in the last probably 5 years than all the 35 years before that. I'm like, what's going on here? I'm seeing a significant increase in the amount of what Jung would call neurosis, which is just like a building up of all sorts of ailments, from digestive disorders to skin problems to cognitive problems. It's like, like a system going into chaos. And some of these issues are classic bodily reactions to a lack of secure attachment in the early developmental process of a child bonding to its mother and secondary to the father. But the attachment syndromes develop in the first 2 years. If a child doesn't develop a secure attachment in the first 2 years, then it doesn't have a secure attachment. So you end up seeing a long history of mental, emotional, relational, and physical problems that mirror back a lack of integration from those first 2 years of development. But one of the things that I think is really relevant, and I have a podcast out right now, I think both of you would find very fascinating. It's with Thomas Mayer, who wrote the book, COVID Vaccines, A Spiritual Perspective, which is a profound book. And I share a lot of my own experiences in the podcast. But Thomas Mayer is a very skilled initiative of Steiner's teachings and a very deep spiritual healer. He's written books on nature spirits and has done a lot of work with entities. And in the book, he interviews about 50 skilled clinicians who all have clairvoyant abilities and extrasensory abilities. And they described very consistently from around the world what they saw in people's bodies after being vaccinated for COVID. And some of the things that you guys are describing go hand in hand with the changes that he's seen and that I've seen. Have you made any connection, either of you, with your clinical practice, what you're seeing in your work with the OOV, reflexes, body tissue, flexibility, rigidity, et cetera, in people that have been vaccinated? And do you think that's a factor in everything we're talking about?
Look, I think that I started seeing these changes emerge in 2018. So I have a hard time apportioning excessive blame to what happened in 19 and 20, respectively. Some people come in and offer up that something like that seemed to initiate a distress in their system, but I'm seeing, and there's quite a significant unvaccinated population in the part of the world that I live in. So I'm also seeing these symptoms complexes emerge in those populations too, which leads me to believe that probably something is more prolific than any one particular instance or intervention that people have been subjected to.
It could be, but I've actually seen scientific research where they've taken the blood out of unvaccinated people, and they have found that they have spike proteins and all the markers of people that have been vaccinated through vaccine shedding. And so it's gotten to the point now where the researchers doing this stuff say there's nobody that can escape the effects of these vaccines, because the evidence is very clear that whether you got vaccinated or not, because they're designed to shed and transfer that way, you're pretty much at some level going to have to deal with it. And this is why I've spent so much time collecting and working on cleansing approaches to people. I've done several of them myself. The whole family has. So I think there's so many compounding factors, we can't keep track of them, but I'm just making the point that it's pretty impossible to think just because someone's unvaccinated based on scientific research and my own experiences that they're not going to be infected by at least the toxicity that comes through these things. So I think there's so much to it.
There was a study in Nature in June 2020, which was well before the vaccine was released, where they did a study of people in northern Italy who had died of COVID. And it was an autopsy study, and they found no traces of the virus in any brain tissue, but they found the spike protein. So even prior to the vaccine, the spike protein was shown to be able to cross the blood-brain barrier. And because of that cleavage site of the way that it was actually constructed, that the virus didn't cross the blood-brain barrier, however, the spike protein did, which is what, apparently is one of the processes that leads to some sort of neurological change. So I think it was more like COVID was definitely, and the virus itself was definitely manufactured for that spike protein to cleave that way, from my understanding.
It doesn't discount the fact that I saw what we saw in 2018. I just have to keep putting that
True.
up. I think it becomes too convenient a poster boy for what's going on right now, and has the capacity to take many, many gifted minds off the ball simultaneously in one collective dissonance, and not looking at solutions and trying to blame something that may or may not be the instigating cause of what we're seeing.
I don't really think that's the point, Nicholas. I think that we have to look at all the compounding factors. If you go to a clinic and you just erase out of your mind any one possibility because you have a personal bias against it for some reason, then you're not really an effective clinician. You have to look at all the possible inputs. And I suggest both of you read Thomas Mayer's book and look at what therapists saw, because it directly relates to core survival systems, fascia, tissue, binding, lack of ability to move their bodies, loss of craniosacral rhythms. I mean, these are things we can't just ignore. And they're coming from very skilled clinicians. And I look into these things because I have to do my diligence to the public. And my responsibility as a therapist and a leader to people is to look at all the possible factors and try to do my best to identify within a given person what is it that I need to focus on you. For example, if someone needs a heavy metal detox and they need to do things that clear spike proteins to decrease inflammation in their body, and I don't do that, then I can do any trick I want. I can oof the hell out of them. I can do whatever I want. And I've got too much of a factor working against the integration of the body. So I appreciate that there's a lot of factors. And I think the problem is that we're living in such a unnatural environment, most people, that we've gotten so far from our biological, psychological, tribal, spiritual, our connection to who and what we were shaped by and to be over millions of years. I mean, when you look at the amount of time it's been since we were living in more of a tribal society, like the Aboriginals would have been, or the natives of all the regions of the world would have been, it's a flash in the pan in the scope of human evolution, right? It's like a tick or two on the clock, but the impact. So my point is, when you look at how long it takes the body to evolve all these reflex systems and all these brain centers and the complexity of 100 trillion cells working together, and you say, okay, what was the environment for the large majority of that? And what is the body really designed to attune itself to? And what's the frequency range and the receptivity of that? What's the information processing capacity of a human body before it goes into some kind of an overload? I think that in the last, since the beginning of the industrial age, we've got this rapid acceleration and extraction of people out of nature, extraction of natives into reserves. And so I think that there's this very concentrated period of time that is such a short time from an evolutionary perspective to take on this, shall we call, burden, that there's going to be a long string of potential breakdowns. And that can go from genetic challenges to psychological challenges to relationship challenges to, like here's an example. 2 things. The number one cause of bankruptcy today is not stupid spending. It's not overusing credit cards. It's people going bankrupt because their medical bills are so high that they can't pay off their bills. Well, that's a severe threat to your reptilian brain alarm systems that I mentioned earlier. I recently heard a statistic a few months ago that 72% of Americans are now having to use credit cards to meet their survival needs. And that goes all the way into people making as much as $300,000 a year. So you take the COVID factor, you take the information overload factor, you take the destruction of the food supply, the chemicals in the environment, the chemtrails, the herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, rodenticides, the lowering quality of food, the poor quality of the treatment of animals, the breakdown in our family unit. I mean, my God, you can practically just point in any direction and hit something that if you can resolve it will enhance the overall function of the human body. So anyhow, that's why I'm bringing this up. All I'm saying is I don't think we should just reject it because there was problems before. I think we got to look at all the factors because the magnitude of what's going on from a psychological perspective and a physiological perspective is enough to create significant alterations in what we would see, you and I, if we were blind to the people walking in the door, we didn't know where they came from or what they'd been going through. People like you and I would all be going, what the hell's going on with these people?
No, I completely agree. And I think the threat is the overemphasis and vigilance on the COVID point, not the fact that it's included in the smorgasbord of things that may be affecting people's symptoms complex now. I would just caution against this seeming movement that is hell-bent on pointing the finger at just that, and actually by doing so excluding all the other things that you mentioned that we wrote the Biotra book on, so it's front and center of our mind. And what I'm suggesting is that if we, and this may loop back into the original problem that you presented of the information overload, if there's so much to consider, then that may well be the fact why people are compressing down and trying to just look myopically at one thing and sort of hang everything on that one thing. And I think that, sure, we've had this industrial revolution, we've had this separatist notion, and we've built this world around us that's deeply incoherent and impoverished from all of those natural coherence strategies that we grew with. But all those connection points are still there. People are still here to connect with. Nature is still there to connect with. The sun hasn't gone down in the last 100 years and stayed down. It comes back every day. There are strategies that allow people to live in 2025 in joy, in peace, in connection with one another, feeling graceful and strong in their bodies. And I think that way too much airtime is given to the problems and not enough airtime is given to widespread medically equal solutions for everyday people, irrespective of socioeconomic status, irrespective of where they live, irrespective of their background, to connect into who and what they are and feel good and start to spread that goodness. I think we've got time. I think we've got capacity. We just need to refocus our attention and start getting the army of people that have the capacity to do this for people out of looking in one dark corner and start to consider the whole playing board so that we can come up with a unified solution for all.
Well, that's exactly what the Chek Institute teaches.
It does. And
That's
we're
the
very
whole
grateful
mission.
for that. Yeah, you bet.
And it's going to take a quantum shift in our thinking of that man knows better than nature. I think we need a quantum shift around that. And a lot of the time, even the way that we treat people medically is that we're, this symptom-based treatment protocols are very focused on, hold on, we're going to go in and we're going to fix this and we're going to do that and we'll change that, rather than the understanding that the body is probably doing what it really needs to do. Our first philosophy in UV education that Nick and I do is the body's doing the most appropriate thing with the information it has, or the perception of that information. And a lot of the time, the treatment protocols, whatever that may be, are going to go and be focused on the symptomatic complex rather than going, the body is maybe doing that for a reason. Let's change the information around that body. Let's not go and try to impose ourselves on someone's body. Let's not go and try to make it change. Let's not assume that the body's doing something wrong. Let's go in and go, maybe the body's in a defensive position as a result of all of those things that we did actually speak about earlier, of all of the environmental issues that it's actually being faced. Maybe it's in a defensive position, and that is why we're having the net result that we're having. However, if we change that and that way of looking, then we're going to, I think humanity is going to shift, both with our farming, both with our environment, with our treatment of the body. It's understanding that we are living organisms, and we are part of a living organism that is innately intelligent and has that intelligent inside it, rather than us trying to impose ourselves onto it, which is happening systemically through all of the systems that we're employing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you guys are wise enough and old enough, smart enough to know that the amount of money being made on treating people symptomatically and throwing drugs and surgery at everybody is a force of economy. For example, in the United States alone, the tax income from the medical system, I believe, is second only to defense issues. It may be the highest generator of taxable income for the government. So from an economic strategy, when we look at what would it take to create the world that we're talking about, kind of coming back to our roots, there's just not that many people that are motivated to do it. I've been trying to teach this to people for a long time, and it takes a special breed of person that's willing to stop following protocols given in universities or by doctors and think for themselves and test people and look into it. I mean, it's a fair bit of work and education to be able to be skilled at that. My only point is that I agree wholeheartedly. That's what I devoted my life to, is this transition.
Me too.
It's just that when you look at the socioeconomical factors and what history has taught us, it's going to take some kind of a major event that shifts people's awareness to the fact that if we don't go back to nature, we're dead, or the socioeconomical factors in the political system will keep driving us deeper and deeper, because the political system's now bought out by the drug system and the military industrial complex, which is why we're here today having this conversation, is to let people know there's a lot of things that you can do that are not that hard to do. And one of my questions that I have in the outline, which, I'll jump to it right now because it's very appropriate. When you're dealing with so many people living in cities, which is something like 85% of the world population now lives in major cities, how can we, of course, I have my own ideas, but I'd like to hear yours. How can we bring more of the natural environment that the OOV is based on, that we spent most of our developmental history, back into a person's life in realistic ways for someone living on the 22nd floor of a high rise in Manhattan, for example? And I think, the Biotra book is really full of that. I mean, that's really what it is. But for the conversation, when we look at the fact that, probably 50, 60,000 people are going to listen to this podcast, but I'd be really happy if 100 of them bought an OOV. That's a small percentage of the people. So what can everyone listening start doing from the realistic, down in the dirt, not that hard to do perspective? Because Nicholas, that's kind of moving in the direction that you want to take people based on your COVID comments.
Can I just quickly reiterate, and then I'll pivot over to Nick, is like that I agree with you, Paul, but part of why the OOV I was shown the OOV, I believe I was shown it, and this journey is that the revolution will not be televised. The old Gil Scott-Heron song, and part of what I was shown was that if we can start to change people's relationship with themselves one to one, that this is then a grassroots. This is what your work has been. This is what our work is that this is a grassroots change. It's a bottom up change, not a top down. We don't need to break anything down to create something new. We just need to change our relationship with ourselves, which I'll hand over to Nick, of some tools that he's going to talk about how you can implement that. However, my belief is that if we change someone's relationship with themselves, that's going to start to change the relationship with their partner, with their family, with their friends, with their work colleagues, etc. And then the revolution happens. It's a bottom up. It's not a top down revolution. Nick, do you want to continue that?
I just need a little clarity, because when you say changing one's relationship with themselves, that first starts at the top as an idea and has to penetrate through the defense mechanisms of the psyche, the unconscious, the shadow, and a long list of other things. I think changing your relationship with yourself is a lot easier to do. For example, if you have a Swiss ball that anybody can buy and put in your apartment, or you can learn a few infant development exercises, or you can stand on one leg and see if you can balance for a minute and then switch to the other leg. My point is only that changing your relationship with yourself comes with a lot of layers, and most people don't have the discipline or even the skill or the know-how to go about doing it. It's complex, but I think what you're both able to show with the OOV is we can actually unlock a lot of the programming at the bottom without having a bunch of top-down control mechanisms involved. So maybe, Nicholas, if you want to share your thoughts on from that perspective.
Yeah, I think it comes down to richness and availability of information, and that sounds very ambiguous and enigmatic. But where the brainstem is concerned, or actually, let's start with the notion that safety would be a really useful first point in instigating the change that we're talking about. If someone felt safe, how much would that change in how they showed up to themselves, how they showed up to their family structures and beyond? We all agree that that would have a significant bearing on that. And safety, as you've mentioned, Paul, largely resides firstly in the affective loops coming from the brainstem before it becomes thalamocortical and gets interpreted into meaning making. Mm-hmm. So how do we get in the trenches with the grassroots movement that Daniel mentioned and start to resupply the safety to people's brainstems? Well, we have to do it in the way that it was originally built, which was why we approached in the first instance, Paul, because you had the foresight to bring developmental neurology into broad, accessible training methodologies that had a broader health ecosystem attached to it. It's just tricky to do as an accessibility point for people to start to learn a movement that isn't innate and subconscious and already imbued from just doing the task. If someone has to learn how to do something and learn to do it in a correct manner, it's already cortical. If we can put someone in a situation where their entire peregrination starts to start again, and all the central pattern generators and all the different spinal reflexes and fluid medium and the perineural lubricant that all sits within, and all the vibratory constructions therein, none of which people need to know, that's all just a throwaway remark. If they can just be put in some basic positions and let their body start to do the talking and start to fine-tune all those systems, flooding the brainstem with pro-safety, pro-life affirmative information that then gets catapulted up through all the other sort of networks and the branches and starts to impact on their meaning making and their belief tapestry. Now, there is other work that needs to be done at that level for sure, hence the Biotra's kind of triangulated health ecosystem approach with that psychospiritual framework. But ultimately, the world that we live in doesn't seem to offer enough sensory information anymore to override and keep re-smoothing out the scripts in the sensory motor networks that we have. So we need to provide essentially a supplemental version of natural movement into people's living rooms or into their gyms. And the OOV is a wonderful tool in that overall arsenal to allow people to go ahead and do that for themselves.
It is, but it's unrealistic. I'm talking about a mass social scale. If there's 50 or 60,000 people listening to this podcast, for example, I know that anybody that can get to a swimming pool can do a natural movement without any skill involved at all that will have very deep therapeutic effects at all levels of the body and the brain. And swimming is tied with tennis for the #1 participation sport in the United States, with 16% of the U.S. population regularly frequenting swimming pools. So now we're getting to something tangible on a broad scale that doesn't require any thought. It just requires some water. The other one that I use is what I call... It
requires you to be able to swim.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. If you just play in the water, you'll get the effects. You can also buy an aqua jogger vest, which, I think they're about $40-45. And you can just go run in the water, which I've used to rehab a lot of seriously injured athletes and accelerate their rehab very quickly. And then the other one that I use is unbound play. And you guys saw my rock stacking garden. But I think anything that people can do without an outcome objective, in other words, am I going to lose the game? Like if you're playing chess or you're playing most games, there's always the stress of losing, but unbound play has to have no outcome objective, no measuring stick, no grading mechanism. So examples of unbound play would be kicking a soccer ball, not to win, but just to have fun kicking the soccer ball. If you had a horse, riding a horse. If you have a bicycle, riding a bicycle. These are all reflex-rich environments. Some of the things that I tell people to do, like I get people from all over the world having acute episodes of low back pain. They don't know what to do. And I can't even begin to answer all these questions that come at me, or I do nothing but email responses all day long. So one of the things that I say to people is just get on your hands and knees on your carpet and crawl around like a cat or a dog. And once you feel safe, start going backwards, forwards, then trying to turn your body around in circles and going gently sideways, because that position has reflex pathways that integrate the body. And I would say, I don't know what the exact percentage of them, but a huge percentage of people with even acute back pain that they can't even walk get back a hold of me and say, that was a miracle. I don't know how or why that worked, but I feel so much better. So this is the sort of concepts that I'm looking for. Of course, I know the OOV's effective, or I wouldn't be having this conversation with you guys. I wouldn't have asked you for one. But part of my function on my podcast is what can we do for a large number of people based on the same concepts? and I would encourage everybody that could afford an OOV to buy one. But knowing that that's going to be a small percentage of the listeners, what I'm trying to get out of you guys is what are some of the things that take us back to a natural environment that we can do that basically allow us to bypass a lot of the thinking process?
I think that one of the things that we may be overlooking now, hence the value of the OOV in people's lives, and the question about economics has to be handed over to Daniel because that's his show, is the ability to make really profound change to someone's brain while adding at the same time safely a whole bunch of spatiotemporal challenges and buying in at multiple levels of sensory motor shareholders all at the same time, the spine, the mouth, all these sorts of things. Now, if we put someone in a normal movement strategy with gravity, the unbound play, things that I'm a massive fan of and advocate with my patients all the time, we can put someone in an environment that they carry through their same neurological blind spot that has already been established in their strategy, and they take that into that task. And I think historically we could have gotten away with something like that, but I'm suggesting that in the last 5 years, as we've alluded to in this podcast, in the last 5 years, the game has changed. So we need to keep up with the fact that we need to resupply people in the game with the on-the-ground satisfactory strategies for having very quick review processes in their entire nervous system so that then we can advocate for the unbound play. And what I've found in the clinic is once that hoop is jumped through, people naturally and spontaneously yearn for those same activities that are the ongoing medicine. I'm very fond in the OOV courses of saying there's no OOV World Championships for a reason. No one wants to get good at OOV for the sake of being good at OOV. We use that very, very purposefully, very, very quickly in someone's overall daily movement strategy to engender them with the appropriate spatiotemporal capacity, with the appropriate sensory motor richness, to then go and get a really wonderful return on investment in joy and movement from those other tasks.
I appreciate everything you're saying, Nicholas, but I'm going to challenge you.
Cool.
One, the number one cause of all the problems that we're talking about is stress. Stress summates in the human psychophysical being. Doesn't matter if it's contrived beliefs or fears that you manufacture, or environmental threats, or what you see on the news, or inflammatory agents or vaccines. All of it adds up in the human nervous system, and you get a stress response, which is much of the reason you guys are seeing the kind of breakdown you're getting, because the total stress inputs is going up and up and up. The OOV itself, as Daniel just explained, was based on the geometry and the principles of nature. So OOV is really just importing a small amount of nature right into somebody's hands. My question is, what do we do for everybody that can't afford an OOV? Since the OOV came from nature, we have to be smart enough to put stuff on the table. The unbound play concept is one of many, but the point of it is to decrease psychological stress and the perpetual self-evaluation process and the stress of meeting an end goal to either meet one's own approval or get somebody else's approval, which for most people beginning in childhood is a major stressor, which is why one of the things people are most afraid of is speaking in public, because they're afraid to be judged. So I talked about swimming. I talked about unbound play. People can buy books on Feldenkrais exercises for, $15. You can learn how to do something that's very effective for neurological integration. I did 100 hours of training with Frank Wildman, who trained with Feldenkrais himself. I've tested it and used it for years. It's very, very effective. It's not an OOV, but it's a move in the right direction. So I'm going to task you two again. Pretend that you are Robert F. Kennedy Jr., now in charge of the Human Health Services of the United States, except let's make it the world. What's your prescription going to be? For free.
Well, for free is to get back out into nature if you have the capacity to do that. The uneven surfaces, the texture, the coherence patterns from the colors, the sounds, the quality of the air, the earthing if you're in a safe enough environment to be barefoot. textural significance, crawling, brachiating underneath branches, all these things exist, just nobody does them.
Yeah. So when you say brachiating, for the listeners, he means things like pulling yourself up with your arms like a child grabs the edge of a table and pulls itself up to standing, which you could do with a doorway, right? Just squat down or get on your knees and pull yourself up to standing repeatedly up and down. And because you're activating developmental reflexes doing that. I think, I've hesitated for a good reason putting infant development exercises on YouTube or anywhere in the public, because if they're not done correctly, as you both well know, then you drive faulty motor patterns back into the system even deeper. And it's more dangerous because you're accessing pathways that you don't want to make dysfunctional. So I've asked all Chek professionals to please not put infant development exercises on the internet, because you cannot stand there and watch people doing and make corrections. So you're actually releasing a dangerous bomb out there. Fortunately, I haven't had to go policing very many people at all in many years, which is rare. I think they understood the importance of that. But like I said, I've had patients with back problems that just crawl around on the floor. I tell them, do 3, 4, 5 minutes and try to do that 2 or 3, 4 times a day, whatever your body will allow. That exercise is very hard to screw up. I mean, yes, there's things you can do wrong. It's just hard to screw up. But I think there are other things. For example, it's not a movement strategy, but what I've encouraged people to do is get some plants in your house. If you don't have plants and trees in your house, and connect to them and water them, and, sort of bring some nature into your house. Make sure that you're drinking high quality water, because when you bring the water and you're bringing the information of nature in, as long as it hasn't been run through a reverse osmosis filter or some other thing that can have a damaging effect on the water while it's cleaning the water, and because it produces what I call naked water. It actually turns into juvenile water if you're not careful. And then eating food from real farms that's regeneratively farmed or biodynamically farmed or organically farmed, where people care about the farm and the soil, and you're bringing healthy microorganisms into your body. I mean, our inner movements have very much to do with our outer movements. I don't know if you guys have ever seen cinema radiographic images or videos of the organs when a person's just sitting, for example, in a chair or walking down the street. But I had the benefit of seeing that, and it was very amazing to see that all the organs in the body, the first thought I had when I saw the videos, they look just like seaweed when you're scuba diving and you're watching all the plants move. They're in a gentle waving pattern. As soon as I saw this video footage, what they did is they took subjects, filled them with radio marker dye, and then they used a cinematographic X-ray. And so you could actually see all the glands and organs literally glowing this kind of white color, and see that everything was in its dynamic living relationship, just like nature on the inside. But I know from years of experience of visceral manipulation that when that internal system loses its motility and stops moving properly, it produces movement disorders and structural disorders. And I track a lot of that back to toxicity in the body, to bad food, and then of course trauma. But I think, for example, just getting in a swimming pool and playing in the water, or even in your friggin' bathtub, if you want, can help, has a therapeutic effect. So what I've talked about now is bringing a farm into the city, bringing water into the city, bringing plants and trees into the city. If you get your feet on stone or concrete, that'll still have a grounding effect on your body. Are there any other things that anybody could do that we haven't covered yet that you guys want to throw up on the table?
Well, we're getting into the biophysical landscape there with light management, and the sun is free always.
Yes, good point.
Connection with other people, while maybe requires some of those other enrichment points coming in first to make one feel safe enough to engage and be open to another person's relationship. Connection with other people and animals, could be other things you could add to that list.
Animals, fantastic.
Look, I mean, the whole notion of Biotra was to create a very accessible and cheap ecosystem for anyone to access and tap into coherence points of nature in their everyday living in a modern world, in an urban setting. But within that, we're talking about the requirement in some instances for, well, within this podcast rather, some requirement for some additional support to a nervous system that has already been compromised to an extent that access to those things doesn't have the same return on investment that it otherwise would if their nervous system was alive and well and brimming with the faculties and the integrities that we like to see and like to see everybody have. And that's where strategies using things that can artificially implant that back into someone's being to propel them forward like a springboard into those pursuits becomes helpful. And if we see the majority of people by the time they're already adults, they've already developed all of their spinal tone in the image of their earlier sense of safety. And it's very difficult and a long and tedious journey, albeit not a fruitless one by any means, to get someone out and moving in nature for free. That's just going to be value add anyway. We're talking about the amount of value that someone might get back if they already establish some of those pathways in their body and then go out into nature. Because we've got this paradox going here. We want this cheap and cheerful solution for all, but then we also need to do it in a short enough time period that we don't propagate and propel the intergenerational strain. And we need to make sure that it reaches all the hidey holes of the world nearly simultaneously in 1 or 2 generations for it to make a significant enough change to the course of our species.
Well, yeah, that's why I wanted to lean on broadly applicable things, because we can't rely on a NUV to do that. It's just unrealistic. And I think for the clinicians listening, the NUV should be an essential tool for them. But one of the things we didn't mention that's as primal gets is walking. When you look at the statistics on the way people live and how few people, years ago, I interviewed Don Bodenbach, who had a health radio show in San Diego for about 10 years. And he had recently done a podcast or a radio interview with a guy named Michael Mogadon, who's got a master's degree in public health. And his research showed that only 8% of men and 3% of women worldwide do any regularly scheduled exercise, including walking a dog. So we're talking about a worldwide population that is of a level of sedentary that most of people like us have a hard time even imagining, because we are, sort of sitting in the center of our own value system, right? So it's hard to really imagine, like, who in the world could live that way? But that's a pretty significant statistic. And I think, Nicholas and Daniel, when you look at how stress affects the autonomic nervous system, the musculoskeletal system, all the systems of the body, even though I would agree with you, I'd love to have this clinical strategy that you're referring to and for accessing the system at lower brain states. But each type of stress causes a guarding effect or some kind of a compensatory effect at all levels of our being. So I think the real issue for a global shift is, what are the things that we can all think about and do that bring us into less of a reactive way of living and more of an active feeling at one with our life and participating in our life and knowing that we have some tools and strategies that we can use. You guys have both been here to my house, so you see you can see all my drums in the background. It's amazing what you can do just put by yourself with a drum, or I just had a Czech IMS2 group here, and to celebrate the finish of their class, we got them all together and spent an hour or so doing a drum circle, and the shift in their emotions and the shift in their state of being and the primal nature of a drum circle was something profound. And, you look at underdeveloped third world countries, and I've even seen many features of the music being made by kids playing on plastic bottles and buckets. Like you can really, if we really work at it, we can find strategies that almost anybody can use to put themselves, because the act of saying, okay, I'm going to engage some unbound play now. I'm going to engage the responsibility for finding better water. I'm going to take 5 minutes a day to get on the floor and crawl around like a dog and maybe play with my dog at its level. I'm going to pay attention to my plants. The act of making those decisions is already a step in the direction of self-responsibility, sovereignty, individuality, and beginning to think about what are the activities that I can do that ultimately bring me into a greater state of coherence and ultimately have a stress-reducing effect, which can begin to shut down some of those compensatory reflexes. And I know we're all here for the same reason, and we all, we're all hip to what's really going on, and it's a big nut to crack. I mean, we're dealing with a tidal wave size problem, and it's a hard thing. One of the transitions I had to make, Nicholas, is, I used to have a head full of neurology and chemistry and reflexes and hormones, but I can't talk to my patients that way, and I can't talk to the public that way. So I had to say, okay, I got to let this part of me atrophy so I can get more into the things that I can do to meet everybody where they're at, which is why I'm trying to, spend some time in the podcast on that. But one of the things you guys refer to that I think is an interesting concept, I would love to hear more about, you call it the strategies map. Would you guys like to, either one or both of you, give us some explanation of what that is and why it's important?
Well, Daniel mentioned earlier that it's part of our philosophy that the body is always doing the proportionate and perfect job that it can in response to the information that it's receiving. So that's part of that sensory motor loop that I've spoken about a few times. But what happens developmentally is someone starts to procure this increasingly complex and sophisticated way of moving from these involuntary reflexes initially, and then finally conquering different planes against gravity all the way through crawling and kneeling and up to standing and walking bipedally. But every time they achieve a milestone, and this is a little too linear, but every time they achieve a new movement characteristic, or that gets automated, or that gets kind of plastically embedded in part of the motor cortex, they make a map of that movement. And nature had it in mind that whenever you wanted to redo that movement, you had all of the prior conditioning and all of the prerequisital movements there and capable and on call in order to then execute that movement. But what we're seeing now is either that is poorly developed in the first instance, that's an outside data set, we'll skip over that one, or we see people that have gone on their lives and through some process or another, you mentioned toxemia, injurious processes, accidents, really significant emotional events, and they lose some of the preconditioning, they lose some of the characteristics that allowed them to achieve a certain movement in the first place. Yet because of the map they made in their cortex, they still emulate what looks like that movement, but they use a completely different set of systems and circuits in order to achieve that movement.
Can I interject for a second?
Yeah.
What you're describing right now is exactly why I created the saying, repetition is the mother of skill, provided there is skill in the repetition. And that's why my wife, Penny, says perfect practice makes perfect. And that's why I tell people, I give the example, if you're doing a set of 12 in the squat and the last two, you're unable to hold good form because your motor system's fatigued or your nervous system's fatigued, that's the 2 reps. The last 2 reps, let's say they break down, they're the greatest stress input to the nervous system. That's what it actually focuses on and remembers the most. I tell people about the fact that when I trained, probably around, 2005 or 6, I was lecturing in Russia. And one of my friends over there used to have the world record in the clean and jerk, and he's Aleco's distributor, Maxim. He offered me to come train with the Russian Olympic team. And so I did, and it was quite an amazing thing. And what I was amazed by is that their first rep and the last rep of every set looked identical. They never pushed themselves to where they were wobbling or shaking or looked like they were training with bad form. And so I think one of the reason I brought that up is because people need to remember that your body is mapping the greatest threat, which goes hand in hand with what you were saying. And that when we are training, if we push ourselves into states where our proprioception starts to break down due to lactic acid accumulation, or we're training with bad form because we're trying to force something, we're actually imprinting that into the system. And though you may get stronger, you may get faster, you're also having to get better and better at compensating, and eventually the system will let go. So I just wanted to interject that because it seemed to fit right into what you were describing, if I understood you correctly.
Yeah, so it comes down to what are the prerequisite movements, what are all the ingredients that go into executing a movement in the first place. And if some of those ingredients are missing, you'll still generate the meal, but it will have some of the components missing. It won't be fully balanced. It won't be as nutritious as it could have been. Mm-hmm. And so the danger then becomes if you already have an impoverishment inbuilt into the infrastructure and then you go and train, irrespective of how well you think you can manage your form, you will just be corroborating whatever impoverishment sits underneath that system. So we suggest that on the one hand of the spectrum, because it's this beautiful sort of total spectrum, on the one hand of the spectrum, we need to be very playful, very reflexive, no notion of form or structure, just a fully experiential, peregrinating, sort of diverse and rich experience. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you speak about the middle. On the other end of the spectrum, there needs to be, if required, if you wish to live fully in this spacesuit that we've been given, there needs to be a challenge that really pushes your strategy to the edge so that you have that ability to be fluid and dynamic and re-strategize on the fly, because that's what nature requires of us at times. And in the middle of this majority of the training work, the bulk of your training work, which I agree with you, doesn't want to every set, every rep push itself towards the right-hand side of the spectrum. There's great value in sitting just below that threshold and really ingraining movement strategies, really developing a relationship with the tools that you're using with your body under certain circumstances, how it responds after doing the work to rest ratios, those sorts of things. But the whole spectrum needs to be considered. And what we're proposing with the OOV sits all the way down on one end of the spectrum. And what we would like to see people doing in your estimation is in the middle end of the spectrum, but still invariably from one dimension or another, their strategy is going to be pushed to its max. And there's some value in exploring all the avenues and the different domains where that can take place too, not just because it's super fun and explorative, but also because it's healthy and it creates that growth.
You know, when I've worked with elite athletes, whether they be gymnasts or Cirque du Soleil performers or world-class martial artists, cage fighters, boxers, X-game competitors, skateboard stars, you name it. What I find is that when I am able to reestablish healthy developmental connections, which we could just look at the infant development sequences, which and the kind of things that the OOV is starting with at the very core level, I think those people are in a great place to challenge themselves because, to give you an analogy, as a race car driver myself, when I was young, I was a competitive stock car racer and I drag raced. If you start a stock car race and you're slightly towing out, you're always going to have to compensate for it. And you're never going to beat a guy who's just as good a driver as you that has a fully functional car. But if the car is set up properly, you can push it and yourself to the maximum and probably get some developmental growth, where if you're starting off in an exercise program like the car that's towed out, in other words, you're missing some of the developmental stages, you're actually, as you were saying, building more and more strength and power on a dysfunctional understructure or developmental sequence. And I think, having worked with so many professional teams and done primal pattern movement assessments on them and infant development assessments, I don't think I can remember a single athlete that could make it through a primal pattern movement assessment that didn't have multiple faults. And so when my students ask me, well, how the hell could that be? These are gold medal winners. These are champion athletes. So you remember, what makes a great athlete is they're also great compensators. They're cats. They're survivalists, and they have strong minds, so they can push their bodies to extremes, even in challenging situations. For example, when Danny Way first jumped out of a helicopter 35 feet in the air to try to set the Guinness Book of World Record, he badly injured his ankle, and the doctor had to inject him with a numbing agent and tape his ankle. Then he landed it the second try. But most people, the pain and the shock of damn near breaking your ankle would have stopped them from a second try. Then he goes to do the Great Wall of China, which is this massive, crazy long jump. I don't know how many feet it was from one ramp to the next, but he also wiped out and seriously injured his ankle, had to get injected, had to get wrapped, had to try again, made it. Point being is, you're talking about a caliber of athlete that has the ability to cognitively override fear and pain, which very few people have. And having spent years working with broken people like that and building them back up, that's one of the things I had to do, because Danny's now had 30 surgeries. So every time I had to work with him, I had to say, okay, what's broken? Where do we have to start to rebuild the system to get it to talk effectively again? So I think that it's important that we have to be aware, of those of you that are athletes, of having somebody that has the skill to assess these developmental patterns, be they primal patterns and infant development patterns, or you could just be prophylactic by the OOV and start doing it every day. How many minutes do you guys think it would take? I would guess 5 to 8 minutes would be enough of a dose to get some therapeutic benefit, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we have an app that takes people through different stages of the developmental reflexes, and it's about 8 minutes a day.
Yeah, just from playing with it myself, I felt, like 5 to 8 minutes of this is like a great reset for the system. I would say to people, you wouldn't want to push it beyond the point at which that you feel like if you start to struggle, then you probably have hit your threshold, because people's nervous systems get weak and have to develop too. I developed a lot of Swiss ball exercises specifically to strengthen the reflex capacities of the nervous system and the overall nervous system, and found that with athletes in complex sports where they've got to manage a lot of things at once, such as weapons or multiple attackers, or things like X Games racing, motocross race, they have to have quite a strong nervous system. And a lot of the typical stuff in the gym does not develop their nervous system adequately. It develops the muscular system, it develops the metabolic system, but not the nervous system. And I think from my experience of the OOV, it's very good for developing the nervous system as well.
Yeah, that's definitely its forte, and it offers an opportunity to layer in complex spatiotemporal drills on top of those positions. So people are getting not only those basic contractile field positions that we spoke about all the way at the top of the podcast, but also hunting actively for any blind spots in any part of their map building capabilities, finding them and then remedying them for themselves. So it's very unique in that it's very potent. It's a supplemental version of what nature had already in store for us developmentally and on a day-to-day basis. And it allows people to connect back into that and foster the benefits of having that in their corner before they go and live their lives. And if we're talking about trained athletes there, we know about the relationship between the super elite performers have a slightly better spatiotemporal predictive map building capacity than the chase pack that comes just 5% below them. So it'd be really interesting to see what happens when a whole bunch of grassroots athletes get a handle on the technology to build that and not just leave that for chance and wait for that to trickle into the elite performers domain. And we might see for a welcome return to that sort of consistent improvement curve that we've seen in other periods of technological advancement in sport, whereas we've kind of hit this point now where things are nearly at their max and we only see advances in very kind of paltry terms.
Well, we see more and more biohacking is what we're seeing.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, and I think what we try to do with the program, Paul, is very much stage it at different levels and incorporate and stage someone correctly at the level that they're at, and then start to incorporate many of the things you already spoke about in this podcast of the eye movements, the inner ear, the head, upper cervical spine, which are all big information inputs of for the brain to actually understand where it is in space while they're in those contractile field positions of the developmental reflexes.
Yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but my intuition, having used the OOV, is you could probably pretty safely like throw a bunch of them on the floor in a kid's playroom or in a school or in a gym, and there's probably not much you're going to do on the OOV, whether you know what you're doing or not, if you're just trying to balance on it and use it, that's not going to have some sort of therapeutic benefit. Am I safe in saying that?
I think you're right. I think that the whole idea of the tool is that it's very intuitive and it actually fits into the body in many, many different ways that we use it in all ways. We use it in prone, side lying, kneeling, standing, quadrupedal positions. And there's, watching kids play with it is really interesting because they do instinctively go towards those positions themselves.
When I was going to ask you, you mentioned standing. I haven't tried it yet. Have you got exercises where they put it along their spine against the wall and maybe work on, moving or going to one leg, or how would you use it against the wall?
We've done that for many, many years of using it against the wall, but we also use it standing with your feet on either side of it.
Oh, standing on top of it.
Yeah, which is an instability side to side, or you put your feet across it and it's an instability front to back to challenge both the sagittal and the coronal planes of control. But we also use it clinically with it standing against the wall, and we have done for decade and a half.
Well, one of the things that I think would be really helpful, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm sure you two do. Do you guys have a YouTube channel or anywhere people can go see videos of the OOV being used so they can kind of get a visual for what we're talking about?
Sure.
and get inspired?
Yeah, we have an Instagram, which I think will be part of the podcast. There will be information, but it's the underscore.
Well, yeah, we'll put in the show notes. What is it?
The underscore OOV.
Okay.
And OOV is OOV. It actually stands for out of vocabulary. So when you mentioned you like the name, that it actually stands for out of vocabulary, that there wasn't a word that existed to describe this strange organism. But I loved it because it was also a play on move. And that's really fundamentally what the whole idea of it was about, is to empower people back to moving. And as we've alluded to feel safe, to feel supported, but to take away two very important strategies by the design and the two different curved shapes on the bottom of the OOV of flexion and and rotation away from someone's strategies to actually learn to stabilize. And they're the two most common strategies that we see people incorporate, is either flexion or torsion or twisting. And those two strategies are taken away from that person when they use the OOV. So they have to find a new way to learn to control the body. So it's very unique that it supports the body while you're using it, but it actually is a lot more challenging. You really can't cheat when you're on there. So you'll see a lot of the images and different ways of using it on the actual Instagram. But we also have an app, which is the Oovit app. It's OOVIT. It's available on both Apple and Google Play, and that's the program that allows people to go through all of the different stages of development and reintegrate those reflexes back in and challenge while incorporating, as we talked about, many other factors as well.
You know, what's interesting to me about the OOV is that it's as much an unlearning strategy as it is a learning strategy.
Excellent.
That is, you know,
absolutely.
When you triggered me with what triggered that thought was the name out of vocabulary, because we need to get outside of our shall we say mental and movement strategies and emotional strategies in order to see them and to learn new ways. You can't solve a problem from inside the box that represents the problem. You got to get out. So,
well, philosophically, how do you teach someone something new with the information they've already got? You can't.
Yeah, they have to be willing to transcend it.
Yeah, that you have to change that information. You have to take them out of what they already know to allow them to find something new. And that's the whole point. We're creating where the idea of the OOV was to provide a different environment where your body then changes that away from its normal environment, where it has to find a new way to learn to control the central axis initially, which was what I designed for it, but now multiple ways to actually use it.
Well, you can see the paradox in that. We're taking people away from their normal environment. By using the OOV, we're taking them back into their actual developmental environment because Absolutely. Of the geometry of it. So that just goes to show how far away from nature we've gotten, right? We have to get you out of your environment to get you back into the environment that will help you grow and develop properly. Yep. And we have to unlearn to relearn. Very, very beautiful concept. I'm not an easy guy to impress, but when I first tried the OOV, I'm like, oh my God, this thing's pretty powerful, man. And it's not that easy.
No. And nature is powerful, isn't it?
Oh my God. Yeah. Here we all are.
Yeah.
And, there was things that you guys were showing me, try this, try that. And I could really feel like I had to, it was like requiring me to be really deeply into my body. I couldn't just sit on the outside and think of a strategy. I had to go into my body and almost like let my body tell me, because my mind had no, to use your term, map for what to do with it. It's just like, I don't know how to handle this situation. So it does really, I think, inspire a deep listening effect in the body. That's what I would describe.
That's what we find with most people using it, that they look, I love teaching this in courses, because what you see instinctively with people is that they start looking inward. As soon as you get them into the OOV and challenge them in a particular position or a way, their gaze goes from an outward-looking gaze back into an inward-looking gaze, which means that their conscious brain is listening to their body. Yeah. And if we start doing that a little bit more, I think we'll be a lot healthier and a lot more well than what we currently are.
Yeah, I think you could also call it a presencing device.
Yeah,
because it brings you really into the present moment, and in presence with yourself. And it's easy to externalize yourself, even with like going to the gym. People are watching everybody else, or looking in the mirror. They're listening to often shitty music,
really loud music. Yes.
But the most exercises aren't triggering a presencing in you unless you're in the very beginning stages of learning. But I don't personally think you could get good enough at the OOV to outgrow the presencing effect of it.
Well, it brings you back to yourself.
You guys
Nick,
might be able to use it
Yeah.
all the time, but I haven't had enough time to get to that
Nick,
level.
do you want to add to that?
No, it's always a lovely way to activate the body at those deeper levels before moving into a workout, because it does exactly that. It creates that real distinction between whatever else is going on in your life and, okay, now it's my time to move and be in my own body and experience my body. And so it just creates a very swift junction there, which lays the foundation for then going and having a sort of a more transitional experience between in and out of your body in those more sort of stimulating gym environments.
It reminds me, I don't know if I think I might have mentioned this to you, but many, many years ago when I was doing a lot of EMG studies and doing a lot of analysis of inhibitory patterns, excitatory patterns. Why did people not have the ability to activate their TVA, their pelvic floor, their multifidus, their rotator cuff, etc.? Quite by kind of almost by accident, I think I was measuring the activity of somebody's lower abdominal muscles, and I was using a biofeedback, like a little handheld EMG device. And this woman had a C-section, and she could not get her lower abdominals to activate. And I tried cueing it. I tried using some Feldenkrais exercises. And then it just dawned on me, I wonder what would happen if I had her try to kneel on the Swiss ball, which I knew she wouldn't be able to do. But I figured if I could trigger a survival reflex, that her brainstem might override these inhibitory patterns as an attempt to keep her from hurting herself. And so I still had the EMG leads attached to her, and I got her and I held her and got her up on a Swiss ball and said, all I want you to do is just try to balance on the ball, which, obviously it was hard for her to do, but I kind of just gave her just enough support, and the ball's moving all around and she's really like into her body because she has to focus on the ball. And immediately I began seeing spikes on the EMG from the muscles that normally wouldn't turn on. And after about, 30 seconds to a minute, I said, now let's lay on the floor and try this again. And it worked like a charm. It was like she had been through months of therapy. But then I noticed after about doing this to people over and over again that it would only last about 3.5 to 5 minutes before the body would revert back to its compensatory patterns. And so I developed the survival reflex activation technique as a means of reestablishing normal neural networks and new movement patterns or recruitment patterns. So I would take people like that, do a set of exercise, do a survival reflex after they had a little rest, jump back on the exercise. And I found that I could override the protective reflexes that the body had built. But I also had to do things like clearing scar tissue out of the system, mobilizing fascia to get the system to work. But if I coupled skilled manual therapy with survival reflex activation with corrective exercise, a lot of these people that normally weren't getting rehabbed and were just having chronic pain for the rest of their life, I was able to turn them around. And the point I'm bringing up is that it seems like the OOV is actually triggering what I would call a survival reflex activation because the body's in this unstable position. I found that if a person didn't actually have it in their mind that they could fall, that the reflex activation wouldn't work. For example, if I stood either of you up in front of me, say I was testing a muscle that wasn't firing in you, multifidus, whatever, and all I did was push on you, but you didn't believe that I was going to actually knock you off your feet or something threatening, it wouldn't work. But when people knew that they could fall off the Swiss ball, or if I didn't have a Swiss ball, what I would have people do is I would have them stand on one leg, but I would go behind them and I would tap them, give them a quick tap, or have them put their arms out and induce a quick torque. And as long as the body thought that it could fall over, I found that the reflex activation would turn on. But having spent years doing that, I got the sense when I was on the OOV that it's accomplishing the same objective. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's right. A lot of the inputs to the brainstem are around orientating oneself in space and time, and we can read into that as balance. So as soon as a lot of those inputs are simultaneously nourished, then the brainstem makes a really suitable adjustment to that to create better balance and to activate anything that is required in that, often the very deepest layers to the body anatomically to do so. But just to your point, I've found clinically that often in those kind of more sort of transient holding times, often that's lodged in some higher order spatiotemporal organ, so in an eye position or in a tongue position or in a swallowing reflex or something like that. So what we've learned to do is actually to put people in those positions that would otherwise activate those muscles and then go looking for any blind spots in any of the other spatiotemporal organs, find them, integrate them. And then we found that that's usually enough to cajole enough sensory motor loops that were all built off the one inactivation of that tissue and had then sort of managed to manufacture itself into all later loops. We've found that that's a way of engendering all loops, or as many loops as conceivably possible at the same time, and getting that really permanent kind of reset capacity in those tissues and in those functions. And often you'll see people make a very rapid bid in their functional, sort of their organic functional journey in terms of sort of seconds and minutes in front of your eye. And then once they hit a certain point, they then just stabilize at that. The brain has this kind of innate wisdom that seems to be at almost everybody's fingertips, almost not everybody's fingertips, but almost everybody's fingertips. And once it's activated, it seems to want to come online very amenably.
Yeah. You know, the challenge that we face as far as clinicians go is very few people have the discipline that you, Daniel, and you, Nick, and I do to do the study and do the practice to actually develop a broad enough and deep enough scope of understanding to get in a clinic with someone and start doing this kind of assessment and being able to see things on the fly because they know what they're looking at, right? A good mechanic can listen to your car from a block away, and before you even pull in his driveway, he already knows that your engine's out of time or that your valves are knocking or whatever, because they have a lot of skill and a lot of experience. But one of my challenges has always been, it's just that the grand majority of therapists and chiropractors and osteopaths, they just get so comfortable using a small toolkit that they just don't grow beyond that. And I think that's what's led to such, shall we say, average rehab and average care across the board in the medical system. So that's not something we are going to here to fix. It's just an observation that I've made. And it's the challenge I have with Chek professionals is to get them to stay in the program, to do the real work, to pass the requirements, to get to the higher levels. And it's very hard, for every one IMS-5 graduate, there's probably 200 at the lower levels. So you see this pyramid effect. I just wish more people had more esprit de corps and more passion to grow themselves and go on the journey and see how important this is, not only for their own development, but as a gift to the world. And I don't have a solution for that, but it's obvious that the two of you do this because of a deep passion, not just to make money or to get a degree or whatever, but because well, that's a good question. What makes you do all this, you two? What drove you to this level of study and skill and practice? Because there's a hell of a lot of people all around you with the same degrees and background training that aren't doing it.
Well, I've got a lot of capacity. I'm here to live, and so I've got the energy. I'm going to invest it in as many different pursuits as I can. And one thing that keeps lighting me up is the ability to try to offer people as much assistance as they're willing to receive or come to seek. And unfortunately, there's more people than I can ever sit in front of. And so developing strategies that allow other people to not have to go on a 15-year learning curve that can just be sort of implanted into their practice and maybe offer them another layer to what they're doing for people is a really nice motivator for me right now. And I'm right in that lane.
Yeah, well, I think, anybody that's a therapist or rehab professional just listening to you guys probably would be inspired. So, your journey, my journey, I think for those that really want to achieve mastery at something, it should be inspirational to them. What drives you to do all this, Daniel?
Well, I had no choice. Every time I would go and do something else, and I would sit with myself, I would have, or even think about going and doing something else, I would sit with myself, and my body would have a physical reaction against that, and it was really. I think that I believe everybody has a piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Yeah. I believe we all are a piece of a large living organism. We're a living cell of a living organism. And I believe that if we just embody our piece and find the connections around us, then we complete the picture together, and we're all here to do that. And I think when you're honest with yourself, you've got no other choice but to follow your path. It's not someone else's path. It's your path. You have your art. You have your way of looking at it. You're an individual in that, and I followed mine, and this is where I am, and I couldn't go against myself. Because,
that's the path of the soul, is what you're describing.
Exactly. My body was not having it. I tried. I totally tried. I tried running away, and that's why I went to corporate, But that was all part of my journey as well, of completing what I needed to maybe feel complete to be able to do what I needed to do or get the information and knowledge. But I think if you sit with yourself and trust what your body responds when you think about things or process things, you will be guided to the right direction. So it's and it's fun, and I enjoy it. And working with people is amazing because there are no two people alike. No. And we have the best job in the world because we don't have to do the same thing over and over again. We can get to really sit with someone and allow. I always say when I teach a course, we're the only profession that we get paid to learn, because that person's body
is our teacher.
Is our teacher, and they're paying us to learn from them. Like, you cannot get a better job than that. So I think we're very lucky.
I think also people overlook the fact that even though we're there in the capacity of a therapist or guide in some sense, every one of those patients brings us something, something.
They're our mirror.
They're growing us in some way. You're working with a skilled accountant, and next thing you know, you're talking about why you keep getting shafted on your tax return, and for free they tell you what you're doing wrong. It could be a million things, but I found that there's always this beautiful reciprocity that, just like your pathway was the developmental pathway you took, Nick's, his, mine, theirs is always in some way, but we're often not experts in that path. And we're often a bit, shall we say, unclued in that path, and all of a sudden they say something to us and the lights go off and we go, wow, I just got that $1 million tip for free. And so, and Jung talks about the third that is created whenever two people get together, like a therapist and a patient or client, that there is a being created out of the two of us that carries the wisdom of both of us. And so he talks about how important it is for Jungian psychologists to tap into the third and not think that you're directing the therapy or the conversation yourself, but you're being guided by the marriage of the two of you, which is a being that is transcendent to both of you, something equally powerful, but beyond both of you, because it's carrying all this wisdom in it. And I've really enjoyed looking for the third in the relationship. So it's great to be able to talk to you guys. It's lovely to be able to talk with passionate people that do their homework, that care about their bodies, care about people, care about the quality of craftsmanship that they deliver. I'll just give you each a chance to make any closing commentary that you want to share and any resources you want to share. And then we'll call it a day. I think we've had a beautiful, rich podcast.
Nick, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. It's been fun, stimulating conversation. The thing I enjoyed the most was some of the minor disagreements that we had. I just think that's
that makes it
tremendous.
fun, man.
Oh man, totally. Everyone just gets on these things and blows smoke up each other's asses, and I just think to have that kind of disagreement just gave me so much joy. It really motivated me. So, in closing remarks, I think that what we're facing at the moment in the health and wellness movement is a change in the nature of what we're dealing with, and we all need to come together to find new solutions, because what we're seeing right on the front line of this will become the majority of the bell curve in the next 5 to 10 years. So if we don't quickly get ourselves sorted out and have really good, accessible, widespread solutions for people, we're going to be caught in an unfortunate position in 5 to 10 years' time. And I think I would encourage people to start to look at the brainstem, and particularly in technologies and practices that can develop brainstem safety subconsciously and organically without having to create too much control from the cortex to try to hope that that's going to make its way through against the flow of information down into the brainstem to elicit that response. So obviously the Biotrap book explains a raft of how we've put that together. Nathan Ryan and I have put that together. It includes the clinical reflexive elements of the OOV that Daniel and I have put together. So for me, it's a resource that I'd really like people to consider and to find their own path in what is their birthright in living healthily and joyfully, albeit in a modern world, and not just doing that ruefully, but actually feeling blessed to be in a modern world with all of the trappings, but not being pulled away from our deepest sense of self and safety and connection with ourselves and others and nature.
Yeah, it's a big book. How many pages is that? 300 and something?
With references, it's just under 500 pages, but the font's quite big, so it's very
readable.
Yeah,
lots of pictures. It's a very well done book. I spent a few hours looking through it and reading key sections and just picking up the vibe. And I thought, wow, this is a really beautiful gift, because it carries a lot of. If I was going to write a book, again, what you kind of wrote is really a expanded version of the concept I had for how to eat, move, and be healthy, with a lot more, movement science than I could put in my book. At the time I wrote How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, I was like operating on what are the things that I have to put in this book that everybody needs to know, because if they don't know them, it comes at a consequence. And that consequence is poor health, drugs, doctor's visits, disablement, and a lack of ability to live your dream. But I think you've got a lot of stuff in there that is complementary to How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, and really important today as well. So thank you for that. And Daniel, any closing comments from you, my friend?
Yeah, sure. Again, thank you for having us. And I think just to reiterate, as we spoke about before, is the intelligence of the body is something that you cannot underestimate. And whatever is ailing someone, or whatever is happening within themselves, trusting that and changing your point of view of that, okay, this is, my body's doing this for a reason. Even the idea of a tight muscle, and it's tight, and having to go and release it, starting to then look at it and go, okay, why my body's trying to tighten this up? Why is it starting to do that? Why? And trusting your body first, and listening to your body first is a really great place to start, that journey. As we talked about, what everyone can do, that's free, and the body's there to teach you and help you. And the OOV is just a device that was designed to facilitate that, to give that opportunity for you to listen to your body. So thanks for having us. And I think part of the podcast, our distributors are going to offer a deal on the OOV, and also there is an app. So we're going to give an offer of access for the app as part of all your listeners as well. So I think that's going to be listed as part.
Yeah, it'll be in the show notes. I'm sorry I don't have those details in front of me.
Either do I. I don't have them either. So our distributors, we've got distributors distributing the move. So our distributors will be handling all of that. It'll be in the show notes.
Penny will share all that in the close that will come any second now. Well, thank you guys. Lots of love to you. Keep up doing what you're doing. I'm glad you're so passionate about it. That's, how we make positive changes in the world. Thank you to all of you for listening. I hope you found this a deeply inspiring and educational conversation. I know I sure did. And thank you to our sponsors for all your amazing products and for putting your trust in the hands of regenerative farmers, biodynamic farmers, organic farmers, and helping keep the soil and the planet healthy. Thanks to each of you for what you buy from the sponsors, because it takes care of your body, takes care of the people that contribute to the making of the products that help us so much and contributes to the podcast so I can keep getting super cool, smart guys like Daniel and Nicholas on the podcast, which is hard to top, but I do my best. And so lots of love. I look forward to sharing something with you next week. Aho, great spirit. See you then. Thank you, guys. Lots of love.
Thank you, Paul. Love to you. Bye.
Thank you.
Aho.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guests, Daniel Vladeta and Nicholas Dawe. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube. To try the OOV yourself, please check the show notes where we have special offers for our listeners in different parts of the world. To take one of OOV's many educational courses, visit ooveducation.com and connect with them on Facebook at OOVment and Instagram at _OOV. You can read, listen, and learn more from Dr. Nick on Substack at drnickdawe.substack.com and on Instagram at biochar_official. For more interaction with Paul and to share ideas and ask questions about the topics discussed in this podcast, we invite you to join his Spirit Gym program and community. There are 3 different levels of membership to fit your budget and lifestyle, where you can participate in live Q&A sessions with our podcast guests, access the members forum within the Spirit Gym community, chat with other members, attend weekly virtual meetups with Paul, and study his comprehensive Master Key online program. Explore the options and subscribe today by going to myspiritgym.com.